Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. I had always been meticulous about locking my car, especially after hearing stories of theft and break-ins. Every night I made sure the doors were securely locked, the windows rolled up, and the alarm set. I took extra precautions, never leaving anything of value in plain sight. It had become second nature to me, like brushing my teeth before bed, and I never once questioned the safety of my car, parked right outside my apartment building. That's why it struck me as strange when I returned to my car one morning to find the passenger seat pushed all the way back. It was something I had never seen before, and at first I assumed I must have forgotten to adjust the seat after driving. But as I got closer, I realized the seat wasn't just pushed back, it was pushed back further than I could ever reach. It was as though someone had been sitting there, their body pressed into the seat, and had adjusted it for comfort before getting out. My stomach churned, and I quickly checked the driver's seat, hoping to find some explanation, but everything else seemed in order. I felt a pang of panic rising in my chest. I was certain I had locked the car the night before, and yet, here I was standing in front of it with the unsettling feeling that someone had been inside while I was asleep. My mind raced with questions. Was I being paranoid? Had I somehow missed something? I checked the door handles, the windows, the trunk, everything seemed secure. But that seat made it impossible to ignore the feeling that something was off. The first thought that crossed my mind was that maybe someone had been messing with me. Perhaps a prankster had decided to play a trick and had gotten into my car while I wasn't looking. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that didn't make sense. If it had been a prank, why would the seat be pushed back in such an intentional way? And why hadn't they taken anything from the car? There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no signs that anyone had rifled through my belongings. Everything appeared normal except for that one small but chilling detail. I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe I had simply forgotten to lock the car. Maybe I had left the keys in my bag, and someone had opened the door and climbed in. But I knew deep down that I had locked the car the night before. It was a habit I never broke. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that clung to me as I stood there, staring at the car. I wondered if I had missed something, some sign that might explain what had happened. My mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. I decided to take a closer look inside the car, hoping to find anything that would give me an explanation. I opened the door slowly, half expecting to find something strange waiting for me inside. But there was nothing unusual in the car itself. The floor mats were in place, my bags and belongings were exactly where I had left them, and the air smelled the same as it always did. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Then I noticed something odd. A small piece of paper was wedged between the passenger seat and the door. I pulled it out carefully, my heart racing. It was a scrap of notebook paper, folded in half. I unfolded it, hoping to find an explanation, but all it contained was a single sentence, written in uneven handwriting. "I was just waiting for you." My hands trembled as I read the words. It was the last thing I had expected to find. Who had written this note? And why had they left it in my car? My mind began to spiral with a mix of fear and confusion. Was this some kind of warning, or was it just a cruel joke? I couldn't make sense of it. My stomach twisted as I tried to remember if anyone had been near my car the night before. I couldn't recall seeing anyone. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I hadn't been paying as much attention as I should have. Could someone have been watching me? I took a deep breath and tried to calm myself. Maybe I was overreacting. After all, it was just a note. Maybe it wasn't meant to be taken seriously. But the nagging feeling that something wasn't right refused to leave. I had never been so sure of locking my car, and yet, here I was, standing in front of it, wondering if someone had been inside. The idea of someone invading my space while I was unaware sent a cold shiver down my spine. I decided to check the security cameras in the building, hoping to find something that might explain the strange occurrence. I pulled up the footage from the previous night, fast-forwarding to the time when I had parked my car. At first, everything seemed normal. There were no unusual movements, no signs of anyone lingering around. But then, as the footage continued, I noticed something unsettling. At around 3 a.m., there was a shadow that seemed to pass by my car. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The shadow moved in a way that suggested someone had approached my car, stood near it for a moment, and then walked away. My heart skipped a beat. The footage wasn't clear enough to make out any details, but the fact that someone had been near my car in the middle of the night, without my knowledge, made my blood run cold. I had no idea who it was or why they had been there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on my car, but nothing unusual happened. No more notes, no more strange occurrences. Yet, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over me. I still checked the locks every time I got into my car, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of paranoia whenever I walked past it. Whoever had been in my car that night, whether it was a prankster or something more sinister, had left me with a lingering sense of dread that I couldn't shake. I wasn't sure what to do next, but I knew one thing for certain: I would never look at my car the same way again. Story 2. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night, my heart racing as I tried to make sense of the noise that had disturbed my sleep. It sounded like someone whispering my name, soft, almost inaudible, but distinct enough to jolt me awake. I sat up in bed, straining my ears, but everything was quiet. At first, I convinced myself it was just a dream, a trick of my mind, and I lay back down, trying to calm my breathing. But then, the whisper came again, clearer this time. It was almost as if it was right next to me, a cold breath on my ear, whispering my name. My pulse quickened as I sat up again, my eyes darting around the dark room. There was no one there, just the faint glow of the moonlight streaming through the window. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe I was just imagining things. Still, the feeling of unease settled over me, and I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. I lay in bed for a while, my thoughts racing. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, seemed amplified in the silence. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But then, a thought occurred to me. I had a security system in place, cameras monitoring the outside of my house. Maybe I could check the footage and put my mind at ease. If there was nothing there, I could go back to sleep without worrying about it any longer. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table and opened the security app. The screen flickered to life, and I tapped on the camera feed from the front yard. At first, everything seemed normal. The yard was empty, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. I let out a breath of relief, thinking that perhaps I had overreacted. But then, something caught my eye. In the corner of the frame, near the edge of the yard, there was a shadow. My heart stopped. I leaned in closer to the screen, my fingers trembling as I rewound the footage. The figure was standing still, just beyond the reach of the porch light, partially obscured by the trees. It was hard to make out any details, but there was no mistaking the shape of a person. My blood ran cold as I realized the figure wasn't just standing there, it was staring directly at my house, unmoving. The whispering voice from earlier echoed in my mind, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I watched the footage in disbelief, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The figure stood there for several minutes, not moving, not doing anything. It was as if they were waiting for something or someone. My skin crawled as I realized the implications. How had they gotten there? I hadn't heard any sounds of footsteps, no rustling in the bushes. It was as if they had materialized out of thin air. And what was worse, they were staring at my house, at me. I rewound the footage again, this time focusing on the time stamps. The figure had appeared just moments after I had heard the whisper. It was almost as if they had been waiting for me to waking up. I felt a wave of panic rising in my chest, my breathing becoming shallow. Who was this person, and what did they want? I checked the other cameras around the property, but there was no sign of them anywhere else. It was as if they had only appeared in that one spot. I decided to take action. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That I heard someone whispering my name and then saw a figure standing in my yard. It sounded insane. But the footage didn't lie. There was someone out there, and they were watching me. I grabbed my phone, prepared to dial 911, but then I hesitated again. What if the person was still out there? What if they were waiting for me to make a move? I decided to wait, to watch the footage one more time, to see if the figure would do anything. I couldn't help but feel like there was something important I was missing, some detail I hadn't noticed. As I watched, I saw the figure finally move. Slowly, almost deliberately, they turned and began to walk away from the camera's view, disappearing into the darkness of the yard. The footage ended shortly after that, and I sat there, staring at the blank screen, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. My hands were shaking, and I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck. The whispering, the figure, the eerie stillness, it all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But it was real. It had happened, and it was still happening. The person was out there, somewhere, and I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. My first thought was to go outside and check, but I quickly dismissed it. What if they were still there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for me to make a move? I spent the rest of the night sitting in the dark, watching the footage over and over again, hoping for some kind of explanation, some sign that I was just imagining things. But there was nothing. No answers, just the lingering feeling of being watched, of being followed. The whispering had stopped, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was coming, something worse than I could imagine. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to check the yard. I had to leave for work, but the thought of returning to that house, of facing whatever had been out there, was unbearable. I called in sick, my mind still reeling from the events of the night before. I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure hadn't just been watching me, they'd been waiting for something, waiting for me to notice them. And now that I had, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Story 3. I had just moved into my new home, a charming 2-story house on the outskirts of town. The house had everything I had ever wanted. A large kitchen, a cozy living room with a fireplace, and a spacious backyard. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets lined with trees, and there was a sense of peace that settled over the place. It felt like a fresh start, the kind of place where I could finally settle down after years of moving from one apartment to another. I was eager to make this house my own. The first few days went by without incident. I spent my time unpacking, arranging furniture, and getting used to the space. The house had a bit of character, with creaky floors and an old-fashioned charm, but it was perfect for me. I was especially fond of the attic, which was filled with old trunks and boxes. It was a bit dusty, but I imagined all the hidden treasures I could find as I sorted through the forgotten belongings left behind by previous owners. I was excited to discover the history of the house, even though it seemed relatively new. One evening, as I was exploring the attic, I noticed something odd. While going through a stack of old boxes, I felt a draft coming from beneath the floorboards. Curious, I knelt down and pushed aside some loose debris. To my surprise, I found a small, hidden compartment. The wood was old, and the nails holding it in place were rusted, but it was clear that someone had gone to great lengths to keep it concealed. My heart raced with excitement. What could be inside? Maybe something valuable, or at least something interesting that would help me learn more about the house's past. With a bit of effort, I pried open the compartment. The smell of old wood and dust filled the air as I lifted the lid. Inside, I found a small stack of photographs, their edges curled and yellowed with age. The photos were worn, their surfaces scratched and faded, but they were still recognizable. What struck me immediately was the subject of the pictures. They were of my family, my parents, my siblings, and even me as a child. I felt a chill run down my spine. These were photos I had never seen before, moments I had no memory of. In the first photo, I was standing in front of a house, one that looked strikingly similar to the one I had just moved into. My parents were beside me, smiling, but their faces seemed distant, almost unnatural. The next photo showed us inside the house, sitting around a table in what appeared to be the very room I had been unpacking in. My family looked happy, but there was something unsettling about the way they were positioned. The way the light hit their faces made them look almost ghostly, as if they were part of a memory I could never quite reach. As I flipped through the stack of photos, the sense of unease deepened. Each picture seemed to show moments from my childhood, but they were all taken in places I didn't recognize, and with people I didn't remember being with. There were shots of my family in various locations, some in parks, others in front of unfamiliar houses, but they were all taken with a camera I had never seen before. The strangest part was that none of these photos had been taken by anyone I knew. There was no way these pictures could have been taken by someone in my family. The camera angle, the timing, and the way the photos were framed were all wrong. It was as if someone had been following us, taking snapshots of our lives without our knowledge. I felt a lump form in my throat as I examined the last photo. It was a close-up of me, standing in the living room of this very house, but I had never been there as a child. I was wearing the same clothes I had on that day, and the room in the photo was identical to the one I had been unpacking in just hours before. But the photo was taken years ago, long before I had moved into the house. It was impossible. How could this be? How could these photos exist, showing my family in places we had never been, at times we had never lived? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that these pictures weren't just odd, they were impossible. My family had never lived in this house, and I had never been here as a child. Yet these photos were proof that we had at some point been in this very place. The realization sent a wave of panic through me. What did this mean? Who had taken these pictures and why? And why had they been hidden under the floorboards? I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was some kind of bizarre coincidence, a mix-up from the previous owners or a strange set of memories that I had forgotten. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. There was something far more sinister at play. The photos were too specific, too detailed, to be random. They showed moments from my life that I had no recollection of, and they were tied to a house I had only just moved into. The more I searched the attic, the more I felt a growing sense of dread. I didn't know who had hidden the photos there, but I was certain they weren't meant to be found. It was as if someone had been watching me, following me, long before I had ever stepped foot in this house. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was somehow connected to the past, to things that had been buried and forgotten. I spent the next few days trying to make sense of what I had discovered. I visited the local library and dug into the history of the house, hoping to find some clue about its past owners. But the records were vague, and nothing seemed to add up. The house had been sold several times, but there were no records of anyone living there for more than a few years at a time. It was as if the house had a history of erasing its occupants, leaving behind nothing but memories that weren't their own. As the days passed, I became more and more obsessed with the photos. I couldn't stop thinking about them, couldn't shake the feeling that they were trying to tell me something. I started to wonder if the house had some sort of power, some ability to trap people in its past, to make them relive moments that didn't belong to them. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being drawn into something far darker than I could understand. And then, one night, as I was sitting alone in the living room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The photo from the stack, the one of me in the living room, was now hanging on the wall, framed. I had never put it there. But there it was, staring back at me, as if mocking me for my curiosity. And beneath it, scrawled in the same faded ink as the letters in the photo, was a single sentence: "Welcome home." Story 4. It started innocently enough, just a few phone calls here and there. At first I thought they were wrong numbers or perhaps telemarketers. The calls always lasted for just a few seconds, and when I answered there was nothing but a faint, muffled noise in the background. Sometimes I could almost make out a word or two, but it was so unclear that I thought it was just interference. I ignored them for the most part, figuring it was nothing worth worrying about. But as the days went on, the calls became more frequent. I would be sitting in my living room, watching TV, when my phone would ring. The number on the screen was always unfamiliar, but I couldn't help but pick it up. Each time I was greeted with the same static-filled silence before the faint voice began to speak. The words were always different, sometimes nonsensical, other times chilling. "Don't hang up," one call said, while another whispered, "I see you." The strangest part was that they were always just a few seconds long, and then the line would go dead, leaving me staring at the phone in confusion. I tried blocking the numbers, but the calls kept coming, each from a different unknown number. The voice became clearer with each call, though still distorted and impossible to understand fully. One evening, as I was sitting alone at home, the phone rang again. I hesitated before answering, the dread creeping up my spine. When I picked up, the voice was clearer than ever, but this time, it wasn't just a random string of words. "You can't hide from me," it said, sending a cold shiver down my spine. I quickly hung up, my hands trembling, but the feeling of being watched lingered long after the call ended. I began to feel paranoid. Every time I walked into a room, I felt like someone was watching me. The air around me seemed to grow heavier, as if something was closing in. I checked the locks on my doors and windows more frequently, making sure everything was secure. But no matter what I did, the feeling didn't go away. It was as though the calls had triggered something, some kind of presence I couldn't explain. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. I didn't want to sound crazy, but the isolation only made the fear worse. The calls continued, each one more unsettling than the last. One night, I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when the phone rang again. I had been trying to ignore it, but this time something inside me snapped. I answered the phone, expecting the usual static, but instead, the voice on the other end was clear, almost too clear. "I'm right behind you." My heart stopped. I froze, the phone still pressed to my ear. The voice sounded so close, as if the person was standing just behind me, whispering in my ear. I could hear my own breath, shallow and rapid, as I slowly turned my head to glance behind me. The room was empty. There was no one there. But the air felt thick, oppressive, as though something was lurking just out of sight. I slammed the phone down, my heart racing, but the feeling of dread only deepened. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I kept checking over my shoulder, convinced that someone was there, waiting for the right moment to strike. But no one ever appeared. The next day I tried to go about my normal routine, but the unease never left. The calls continued, always when I least expected them. "You're not alone," one said. "I know where you are," said another. It felt like the voice was growing stronger, more confident, as if it was playing a game with me. I became obsessed with the calls. I tried tracing the numbers, but each time I attempted to find out where they were coming from, they would disappear. There were no leads, no clues to explain what was happening. The voice never said anything meaningful, just cryptic messages that made no sense. But I could feel that something was out there, something that knew me, something that was getting closer with each passing day. One evening, after receiving yet another call, I decided to confront whatever was behind it. I waited for the phone to ring again, my hands trembling as I sat in silence, staring at the phone. When it finally rang, I answered without hesitation. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fear and frustration. For a moment there was nothing but the usual static, and I almost thought the call had ended. But then the voice came through, colder than ever. "I'm already here." I slammed the phone down again, my heart pounding in my chest. My body was drenched in sweat, my mind racing. What did it mean? Was it a prank? Or was it something more sinister? The thought of someone or something being in my house terrified me. I grabbed my phone and called the police. But when they arrived, there was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of anyone being there. They assured me it was probably just a prank, but I knew better. This was no prank. Something was happening, and I was powerless to stop it. The calls didn't stop. They became more frequent, more persistent. Each time I felt more and more like I was losing control. The line between reality and fear was starting to blur. I couldn't escape it. It felt like the voice was always with me, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. I tried to avoid answering the phone, but the calls kept coming. And then, one night, it came again, the same voice, but this time it wasn't just a whisper. It was a low growl, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "I'm inside." I jumped to my feet, panic flooding my body. I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I turned around slowly, but there was no one in the room. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking, just waiting for me to turn my back. The calls had escalated into something far beyond a simple prank, and I was left in a nightmare of my own making, trapped by an unseen presence that seemed to know everything about me. I didn't know how to escape. Story 5. It had been a long day, and the house was quieter than usual. I had just finished a late dinner when I heard the sound. At first I thought it was just the house settling, but the creaking noises continued. It was coming from the attic. A series of faint thuds followed by a soft scraping sound. I tried to ignore it, but something about the noise didn't feel right. It was almost deliberate, like someone was up there, moving around. I sat on the couch, listening intently, my heart beginning to race. The attic door was just above the hallway, and the creaks and groans seemed to be growing louder. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal or perhaps a loose floorboard, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. My curiosity got the better of me, and I stood up, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be lurking in the attic. I reached up to pull down the attic ladder, the mechanism clicking as it unlocked. The creaking sound intensified as the ladder descended slowly, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I had never been afraid of the attic before, but tonight something felt off. The darkness above seemed to hold secrets, as though it were hiding something. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just leave it alone, but the noises had been persistent enough to draw my attention. Taking a deep breath, I climbed up the ladder, my hand gripping the rungs tightly as I ascended. The air up there was musty, thick with dust, and the light from the hallway barely illuminated the space. I could see boxes stacked against the walls, old furniture covered in sheets, and piles of forgotten belongings. But then, something caught my eye. Near the top of the attic, sitting neatly at the edge, was a pair of boots. I froze. The boots were placed side by side, perfectly aligned, as though someone had just taken them off and left them there. They didn't belong to me. I had never seen them before. My heart pounded in my chest, and I took a cautious step forward, my eyes fixed on the boots. They looked worn, the leather scuffed and faded, but there was no sign of dust or cobwebs around them. It was as if they had been placed there recently. A cold sweat formed on my forehead as I examined the boots. They didn't look like they belonged to anyone I knew. My thoughts raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Was someone living up here? Had they been hiding in the attic, using it as a secret space? I swallowed hard, the realization creeping up on me that someone could be living in my home without my knowledge. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I slowly scanned the rest of the attic, my eyes darting from one shadow to the next, trying to spot any signs of life. There was no movement, no sound. The only thing that seemed out of place were the boots. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, and the air felt heavier, suffocating. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. What if someone was hiding up here, watching me? I stepped closer to the boots, my mind swirling with possibilities. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the worn leather. They were warm. My breath caught in my throat. I had been alone in the house for hours, and the boots were still warm, as if someone had just left them there moments ago. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whoever had been in the attic wasn't far away. I backed away from the boots, my heart racing in my chest. I needed to get out of the attic. I turned to descend the ladder, but just as my foot hit the first rung, I heard a noise behind me. A soft shuffle followed by the faintest of breaths. My body froze. Someone was up here. I didn't need to see them to know it. The air had shifted, and I could feel the weight of their presence. My pulse quickened, and I whipped around, my eyes scanning the shadows, trying to find the source of the noise. There was nothing. Just the old boxes and forgotten belongings untouched. I held my breath, straining to listen, but the attic was silent once again. The only sound was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Was it my imagination, or had I truly heard something? I didn't wait to find out. Without a second thought, I scrambled down the ladder, my legs shaky as I descended into the hallway. I slammed the attic door shut behind me, my breath coming in short gasps. The house felt different now. It was as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The quiet seemed heavier, more oppressive. I stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. The boots, the noises, the unsettling feeling in the air, it all pointed to something I couldn't explain. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. Had someone been living in the attic? Had they been watching me, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves? The thought was terrifying, and I couldn't shake it. I decided to check the rest of the house, making sure every door was locked, every window secure. I needed to feel safe again, to convince myself that there was no one else in the house. But as I moved from room to room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The air felt thick, heavy with the sense of something or someone lurking just out of sight. When I finally made it back to the kitchen, I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The boots, the noises, the feeling of being watched, it was all too much to process. I had to know the truth. I had to go back up there and confront whatever was hiding in the attic. But as I stood there, staring at the door to the attic, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back up there alone. Story 6. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence when I found my mail opened and rearranged. The envelopes weren't ripped or torn, just slightly ajar as though someone had carefully slid them open. I assumed it was just a mistake from the postal service, maybe a mix-up or some kind of error during delivery. It didn't seem like a big deal at first, so I closed the envelopes back up and tossed them aside, thinking I had simply misremembered how I had left them. But then it happened again. This time when I came home after work, I noticed the small pile of mail on the kitchen counter looked different. The bills and letters that had been there earlier were now out of order, scattered across the counter in a way that made no sense. I didn't recall leaving them like that. It wasn't just the mail, though. Other things had been moved around as well. My keys, my wallet, even the small trinkets on the counter that I always kept in the same place were slightly out of place. A sense of unease crept over me, but I brushed it off as another moment of forgetfulness. As the days passed, the pattern continued. More mail appeared opened and rearranged. The letters seemed to be tampered with. The edges of the envelopes slightly frayed, as though someone had opened them too carefully, but not quite neatly enough to leave no trace. I started to feel like I was losing control over my own space. It wasn't just my mail anymore. One day I found a family photo I kept on my desk turned slightly askew, as if someone had picked it up and studied it. The thought that someone had been in my home, touching my things, started to make my skin crawl. I began to wonder if I was imagining things, or if maybe I had just been distracted and hadn't noticed the changes before. But there were too many little inconsistencies. I noticed the pens I always used were no longer in their usual spots. A notebook I kept by the couch was now open to a page I hadn't left it on. It felt as if someone was moving around in my personal space, taking the time to rearrange things ever so slightly, enough for me to notice but not enough to be immediately obvious. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even when I was alone in my house. The turning point came one evening when I was getting ready for bed. I went into my bathroom to wash up, only to find that the toiletries I had placed on the counter earlier in the day were now in different positions. The bottle of mouthwash I always kept at the back of the sink was now moved to the front, and the toothbrushes, which I always kept in their designated holders, had been shifted. I stared at the bathroom counter, trying to make sense of it. There was no way I had done that, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just someone moving things around for fun. This was deliberate. That night, I decided to take action. I placed a few small objects around my apartment in spots where I would definitely notice if they were moved. I wanted to see if I was imagining things or if someone was really going through my things. I felt foolish, but I had to know. The next morning, I woke up early, my heart racing with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I immediately went to check the objects I had placed around the apartment. Sure enough, one of the small items I had left on the coffee table was gone. I checked the rest of the apartment, and it became clear that my suspicions had been correct. Someone had been inside my home. Panic set in as I tried to make sense of it. Who could it be? How had they gotten in? I had no idea. The thought of someone invading my personal space, going through my things, left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. I had always been cautious about locking doors and windows, so the idea that someone had entered without me noticing seemed impossible. But the evidence was undeniable. Someone had been here, moving things around, observing me without my knowledge. I decided to check the locks on all the windows and doors, and to my horror, I found something that made my stomach drop. One of the windows in the back of the apartment, which I was sure I had locked, was slightly ajar. It was a small opening, just enough for someone to slip through unnoticed. My heart raced as I realized the possibility that someone had been coming in through that window, slipping in and out without leaving a trace. The thought of an intruder so close to me, moving through my home while I slept, made me feel exposed in a way I had never experienced before. That night I stayed awake, listening for any sound, any sign that someone might be inside. The silence was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window made my heart race. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea who was doing this or why they were doing it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted. I was a prisoner in my own home, unable to trust the safety of the space that was supposed to be my sanctuary. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Someone had been inside my home, watching me moving my things, and I had no idea why. The sense of violation was overwhelming. It was like I was being stalked, but by someone who knew exactly how to stay hidden, how to stay just out of sight. The longer this went on, the more desperate I became to figure out who was behind it and what they wanted from me. The next day, I took the step I had been avoiding. I called the police. As I spoke to the officer on the phone, I tried to explain the strange occurrences, but I could hear the doubt in their voice. It sounded like something out of a movie, a paranoid delusion. But I knew what I had experienced, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. They promised to send someone to take a look, but deep down I knew that even if they found something, it wouldn't stop the creeping dread that had taken over my life. As I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't help but wonder who was doing this to me. And more importantly, why? What did they want? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswered and growing more urgent with every passing moment. All I knew for sure. Story 7. When I returned home from my weekend trip, I was exhausted. The 2-day getaway had been a welcome escape from the daily grind, but the moment I stepped through the front door, a sense of unease washed over me. The house was eerily quiet, and as I closed the door behind me, I noticed something strange. There, in the middle of the living room, was a small stack of my personal belongings arranged in a perfect circle on the floor. At first, I thought it might be a prank. Maybe one of my friends had stopped by while I was away, and this was some bizarre joke they'd played on me. But as I took a closer look at the items in the circle, a chill ran down my spine. These weren't just random objects. They were things I had left behind without realizing, things I hadn't thought about in weeks. There was a book one had started reading months ago, but never finished. A bracelet I had worn every day until I absent-mindedly took it off and left it on the counter, and a small photograph of me and my sister from a family vacation years ago. Each item was carefully placed, arranged with such precision that it didn't feel like a coincidence. I could almost feel the weight of someone's gaze, as if whoever had done this was watching me now, waiting for my reaction. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't understand how these items had ended up in the middle of my living room, let alone arranged so deliberately. I thought about calling the police, but I hesitated. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken windows or signs of a struggle. It seemed impossible that someone could have been in my house without leaving any trace behind. I bent down to pick up the book first, my fingers trembling slightly as I touched it. As soon as I did, A wave of dread swept over me. I remembered exactly where I had left it on the kitchen table, shoved under a pile of papers. I hadn't thought about it in weeks, but now, here it was, placed in the center of my living room. I set the book back down and scanned the rest of the items, each one stirring up memories I hadn't realized I'd forgotten. The photograph was the most unsettling. It wasn't just any photo. It was one of the few I had left from that trip with my sister. I hadn't seen it in years. It had been tucked away in a box of old family mementos, but now it was right here, in the middle of my living room, as if someone had been through all my personal belongings, carefully selecting what to take and where to place it. I felt a strange sense of being violated, as if my privacy had been completely disregarded. But the most terrifying part was that I couldn't remember leaving these things behind. The bracelet, for example, had been one of my favorites, but I had no recollection of taking it off and leaving it behind. It was as if I had somehow lost time, forgotten pieces of my own life. My thoughts raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Could I have left these items behind without realizing it? Had I been so distracted by something else that I didn't notice? Or had someone else been in my house, moving things around, making it seem like I had left them there on purpose? I felt my mind begin to spiral, each possibility more unsettling than the last. I walked around the circle of items, trying to find any clue, any sign that would explain what had happened. The floor beneath me creaked, and I jumped, startled by the sound. I quickly checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked, but everything appeared normal. The house was secure. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I stood in the middle of the room, I thought I heard a faint sound, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. I froze, straining my ears to listen, but the house was silent again. My breath caught in my throat, and I forced myself to move away from the circle of belongings. I couldn't stay here, not with that strange feeling hanging over me. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend, hoping to make sense of the situation. When she picked up, I quickly explained what I had found. "You're probably just overreacting," she said, trying to reassure me. "Maybe you just forgot where you left things. You've been busy lately, right?" Her words made sense, but they didn't calm my nerves. I hung up the phone, pacing back and forth, my mind racing. I couldn't let go of the thought that someone had been in my house. Someone had taken these items and arranged them, and the idea of someone going through my personal belongings without my permission was almost too much to bear. I decided to take a step back and breathe. I needed to clear my head. As I walked out of the living room, I glanced back at the circle of items one last time. The photograph, the book, the bracelet, all of it was just sitting there, mocking me with its calm, perfect arrangement. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that someone knew something about me that I didn't even remember. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that circle of items, each one reminding me of something I couldn't quite place. My mind kept circling back to the question that I couldn't answer: who had been in my house, and why had they left those things behind? The next day, I went through every room of my house, checking for anything unusual. I couldn't find anything else out of place, but the unease still lingered. It was as if something was missing, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. And as I stared at the items on the floor, I realized that I might never know the truth about what had happened. All I could do was try to move on, but deep down I knew that whatever had happened in that room, it would never leave me. Story 8. For weeks I had been visiting the same local coffee shop every morning on my way to work. It was a small, cozy place, with the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air and the sound of soft indie music playing in the background. I had grown to enjoy the routine, the familiar faces, and the quiet energy of the mornings. But there was one person who stood out, someone who had been there every single day, sitting at the same table by the window, silently watching me. At first, I thought nothing of it. People stare all the time, right? Maybe they were just lost in thought, or perhaps I was just being overly self-conscious. But over time, the staring became more intense. Every morning I would walk in, and there they were, always the same person, always sitting at the same spot, their eyes fixed on me. They never said a word, never moved, just sat there, watching me like I was the only thing in the room. It was unsettling, to say the least. I began to feel like I was being hunted, like every step I took in that coffee shop was being carefully observed. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was imagining things, that maybe they were just people watching, or perhaps they didn't even realize they were staring. But the longer it went on, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One morning, as I stood in line to order my usual an iced latte with almond milk, I glanced over at the person again. They were sitting there, as usual, staring at me. This time I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know who they were, why they were staring, and if they were somehow connected to me in a way I couldn't understand. I had to say something. I walked up to their table, my heart pounding in my chest. They didn't even flinch when I approached, as if they had been expecting me. I cleared my throat, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "I've noticed you here every morning. You always sit in the same spot, and well, you've been staring at me for weeks. I just wanted to know if everything's okay." The person's expression didn't change. They simply looked up at me, their eyes unnervingly calm, as if they had anticipated this moment. For a long, uncomfortable second, they said nothing. Then, finally, they spoke. "You're Emily, aren't you?" Their voice was calm, almost too calm, as though they knew me far better than I could have imagined. I froze. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There was no way I had ever met this person before. I would have remembered them. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but I couldn't. I didn't recognize them at all. The person smiled slightly, a small, knowing smile that made my stomach twist. "I know more than just your name," they said softly. "I know you moved here from Chicago last year. You live in the apartment above the bookstore down the street. Now you take the bus to work every morning at 7:45 a.m. And you like your coffee black, no sugar." My breath caught in my throat as they rattled off these details about my life that no stranger should have known. How could they possibly know all of this? I took a step back, my pulse quickening. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How do you know all of this about me? Have you been following me?" The person leaned back in their chair, as if they were enjoying the shock and confusion on my face. "I haven't been following you," they said. "I've been watching you." They paused for a moment, letting the words hang in the air. "For a while now. I find it fascinating, the way you move through the world, the way you go about your day so predictably, so quietly. It's almost like I can predict your every move before you make it." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was insane. This couldn't be real. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why have you been watching me?" The person's smile faded, and their gaze grew more intense, almost hypnotic. "Because I've been trying to figure out how you do it," they said. "How you manage to live so calmly. How you can just go about your life without being disturbed by the chaos around you. I've been watching you because I'm trying to understand how you can be so ordinary and yet so extraordinary." I didn't know what to say. This person had been watching me, studying me for weeks, and I had no idea why. I wanted to run, to get as far away from them as possible, but I couldn't move. I felt trapped, like their eyes were holding me in place. I glanced around the coffee shop, hoping someone would intervene, but the place was as quiet as ever, with no one seeming to notice the strange exchange happening at this table. Finally, I took a deep breath and spoke again. "I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you want from me, but this has to stop." I turned to walk away, but before I could take another step, the person's voice stopped me in my tracks. "I'll be here tomorrow," they said. "Same time, same place. You can't avoid me forever, Emily. You'll be back." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just walked out of the coffee shop as quickly as I could, my heart racing in my chest. My mind was spinning with 1,000 questions, none of which had answers. Who was that person? Why had they been watching me? And how did they know so much about my life? The next morning I hesitated before going to the coffee shop. I wanted to skip it, to never set foot in that place again, but I couldn't bring myself to break my routine. I had to know if the person would be there, if they would be waiting for me like they said. When I walked in, I scanned the room. Sure enough, there they were, sitting in the same spot, their eyes fixed on me as if nothing had changed. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but this time I didn't approach them. Instead, I turned around and walked out of the coffee shop, not looking back. I didn't go back to that coffee shop after that day. I couldn't. I didn't know what was going on, but I wasn't about to let someone like that invade my life any longer. They knew too much about me, and I wasn't about to give them the chance to know more. I had no idea who they were or why they were watching me, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. Story 9. It was a quiet evening when I first noticed the voicemail. I had just gotten home from work, the soft hum of the streetlights outside casting shadows across my living room. The house was still, the kind of stillness that usually meant everything was in order. But something about that evening felt different. As I tossed my keys onto the counter, I noticed my phone vibrating on the kitchen table. A voicemail notification flashed across the screen. Curious, I tapped on the message. The moment the recording began, I froze. The voice on the other end was unmistakably mine, but I hadn't called anyone. I listened intently as the recording played out. "So, how's it been?" I heard myself say. "I'm glad we finally got to talk." The voice on the other end replied, but it was unfamiliar, distant, and slightly distorted. I couldn't recognize the tone or cadence of the other person's voice. My heart began to race. I was sure I hadn't spoken to anyone that day, let alone someone I didn't know. The conversation in the voicemail seemed so casual, as though I had been talking to someone for hours. I tried to recall the events of the day. Who had I been talking to? Who could have left this message? I couldn't think of anyone, and I felt a rising sense of unease. It was as if I had lost time, like there was a piece of the day that I couldn't account for. But I knew I hadn't made any calls. The conversation in the voicemail continued, though the voice of the other person remained a blur, just out of reach. My own voice in the recording sounded strangely distant, as though it wasn't me speaking at all. I didn't recognize the words I was saying, and the tone was unsettling. The other voice spoke in riddles, as though we were discussing something I couldn't understand. But the strange part was, it felt like I should. It felt like we were both involved in some secret, and I had forgotten the details. Then, at the end of the recording, the other voice spoke again, sending a chill through my spine. "It's been fun, but we'll meet again soon." The final words echoed in my mind long after the message ended. I felt the room close in around me, the walls growing tighter, as though the space itself was watching me. I stood there, frozen, staring at the screen of my phone, trying to make sense of the message. I had never spoken to anyone like that, and yet the words sounded so familiar, so unsettlingly personal. I replayed the message over and over again, each time hoping for some kind of explanation. But there was nothing. The voice on the other end remained as strange and distant as before. I checked my phone's call log, hoping to find a number I didn't recognize. But there was nothing. No missed calls, no strange numbers, nothing to explain the voicemail. I even checked my contacts, convinced that I must have saved the number at some point, but no such contact existed. A growing sense of dread began to settle in. I didn't know who had left the message, but I felt as though I should know them. It was as if they were someone from my past, someone I had forgotten, but who had never forgotten me. The words, "We'll meet again soon," replayed in my head over and over, like a haunting whisper that refused to fade. I couldn't shake the feeling that the person who had left the message knew something about me, something I didn't remember. The next few days passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on anything, my mind constantly returning to the voicemail. Every time I picked up my phone, I found myself checking the voicemail again, hoping for some clue, some answer. But there was nothing. The message was always the same. The feeling of being watched, of being somehow connected to the mysterious voice, lingered in the back of my mind. I began to notice strange things happening around the house. Objects were out of place. Things I was sure I had left in one spot were now in another. My reflection in the mirror seemed different, almost as if it were someone else looking back at me. I couldn't tell if I was imagining things or if the message had somehow altered my perception of reality. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, made me jump. I was starting to feel paranoid, as though I was being followed, though I couldn't explain why. One night, as I was sitting in my living room, staring at my phone once again, I heard a knock at the door. I froze. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. My heart began to race as I stood up and cautiously approached the door. I peeked through the peephole but saw no one. My hand hovered over the door handle, but something told me not to open it. I stepped back, my breath shallow, and waited, listening for any sound. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no sign of anyone. The next day, I received another voicemail. My hand shook as I listened to the message. It was the same voice as before, but this time the message was different. "You're not alone," the voice said. "We've always been here." My stomach churned as the words echoed in my mind. The message was cryptic, and yet it felt like a warning, as though I was being drawn into something I couldn't escape. I tried to convince myself it was all a coincidence. Maybe it was some kind of prank, a glitch in the voicemail system, or an elaborate hoax. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. There was something real, something terrifying about the voice and the way it seemed to know things about me. I felt as though I was being pulled into a story I didn't understand, a story that was far beyond my control. Days turned into weeks, and the messages continued. Each one left me feeling more trapped, more desperate for answers. The feeling of being watched never left, and I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. I had no idea who the voice belonged to or why they were reaching out to me. But one thing was clear: this was far from over. Story 10. I had always dreamed of going on a solo road trip, just me, the open road, and the freedom to explore at my own pace. After months of planning, I finally packed my bags, filled my car with gas, and set off for a journey through small towns and quiet highways. It was a peaceful drive at first, the kind that felt like an escape from everything. The sun was setting. casting long shadows over the road as I drove into my first stop, a small gas station on the outskirts of a town I'd never heard of. As I pulled up to the pump, I noticed a white van parked a few spaces down. It was unremarkable in every way, but something about it caught my attention. It was parked at an angle, as if the driver had just pulled in hastily. I shrugged it off, assuming it was a coincidence. But as I filled my tank, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced over at the van a few times, but no one was in it. The driver must have been inside the store, I thought. Still, the uneasy feeling lingered. I paid for my gas and left, continuing my journey down the highway. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but when I stopped at another gas station in the next town, I saw it again, the same white van, parked a few spaces down. This time I felt a twinge of anxiety. What were the chances that the same van would be at two different gas stations in two different towns? It was a strange coincidence, and I couldn't shake the thought that I was being followed. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the van was always parked just far enough away that I couldn't see who was driving it. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was nothing, just a random occurrence. After all, I was driving through small towns, and there were only so many places to stop for gas. But as I made my way to the next town, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The van seemed to be following me, stopping at the same places, at the same time. Each time I stopped for gas, I saw it parked a few spaces down. I never saw the driver, and the van never seemed to move until I left. It was as if it was always waiting for me, no matter where I went. By the time I reached the next town, I was starting to feel paranoid. I checked the mirrors as I drove into the motel parking lot, looking for any sign of the van. When I got out of my car, I didn't see it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was close. I hurried into the motel office to check in, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. The receptionist handed me a key to a room on the second floor, and I quickly made my way to the stairs. When I reached my room and unlocked the door, I was relieved to be inside, away from the world. I locked the door behind me and went to the window to take a look at the parking lot. I didn't expect to see anything, but my heart skipped a beat when I spotted it. The white van was parked outside, just a few spaces away from my room. My stomach dropped, and the unease that had been building all day turned into full-blown fear. How had it followed me here? I hadn't seen it on the road after I left the gas station. Was it waiting for me to stop? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a coincidence. After all, it was a small motel, and the parking lot wasn't that big. But deep down, I knew something was off. I couldn't explain why, but I felt like I was being watched. I paced around the room, my mind racing. I thought about leaving, but where would I go? The van could be anywhere. I didn't know what to do, so I decided to stay in for the night. I drew the curtains and locked the door again, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the van in my mind, parked outside, waiting. Hours passed, and the silence in the room was broken only by the occasional car passing on the road. I was lying in bed, trying to force myself to sleep, when I heard the faint sound of footsteps outside my door. My heart leaped into my throat. I held my breath, straining to listen. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I froze, wondering if it was someone just passing by, but then I heard the sound of the van's engine starting. I slowly crept to the window and peered through the curtains. The van was leaving, driving slowly out of the parking lot, but it didn't go far. It stopped at the end of the lot, just out of view, and parked there. I didn't know what to think. Why had the van stopped? Was the driver waiting for something? Or was it just a coincidence that they had parked there at that exact moment? I felt trapped, as if I were caught in a strange game that I didn't understand. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being stalked, but by whom and why? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I knew I couldn't stay here much longer, but I didn't know where to go or what to do. The van stayed parked at the end of the lot for what felt like hours, and I watched from my window, too afraid to leave the room. I kept my phone close, ready to call for help if needed. Finally, just before dawn, the van drove away, disappearing into the distance. I didn't know if I was relieved or more scared than ever. I waited a few minutes before leaving my room and getting in my car. I had to get out of there. As I drove away, I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the van following me once again. But I didn't see it. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and quiet. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. Still, the unsettling feeling stayed with me, lingering in the back of my mind. I didn't know who was in that van or what they wanted, but I couldn't shake the thought that I had narrowly escaped something far worse. Story 11. I woke up to an eerie silence that felt off. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl as though something is waiting, watching. I stretched, rubbed my eyes, and reached for my phone on the nightstand, only to stop in my tracks. The light from my phone illuminated the room as I scanned it, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. My front door was wide open. My heart skipped a beat. I always made sure to lock the door before going to bed, and yet there it was, standing ajar as if someone had walked right in without a care. For a moment I just sat there in disbelief, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The door wasn't just cracked open, it was completely wide, as if someone had left it that way on purpose. I jumped out of bed, my mind racing, and quickly went to check the rest of the apartment. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway all seemed normal. Nothing was out of place. No signs of a break-in, no missing items, no shattered glass or overturned furniture. It was almost as if no one had been there at all, but that door, it remained wide open. I checked the locks on the door again, just to be sure. It clicked firmly into place, but the fact that it had been left open in the first place still gnawed at me. I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or terrified. My rational mind told me I was probably just being paranoid. Maybe I had forgotten to lock it the night before. Maybe the wind had somehow pushed it open. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. No, I always locked that door. I remembered locking it. But if it wasn't me, who else could it have been? My thoughts were interrupted when I walked into the kitchen. The dim light from the morning sun filtered through the window, casting a soft glow on the room. The counters were spotless, just the way I had left them the night before. But as I moved closer to the counter, something caught my eye, a folded piece of paper sitting innocently in the middle. I hadn't noticed it before, and there was no reason for it to be there. The note was simple, written in black ink, but the words on it sent a chill crawling up my spine. I've been inside. The note was unnerving in its simplicity. The phrase lingered in the air as I read it over and over again, as if it were somehow mocking me. I couldn't understand how or why it had been left there, and it took everything in me not to panic. My heart raced, my mind spiraling with questions. Who could have been inside my apartment? Was someone watching me? The door, the note, it all felt too deliberate, too calculated to be a simple mistake. I turned the note over, hoping to find something that could provide more context. But there was nothing. Just the same 4 words scrawled in that same unnervingly neat handwriting. My fingers trembled as I set the note down on the counter, unable to stop the flood of thoughts that washed over me. Was this some kind of prank? Had a friend decided to mess with me? Or was it something far more sinister? There was no way to tell. I ran through my mind trying to recall anything unusual from the night before. I had gone to bed late, scrolling through my phone for a few hours before turning off the lights. I hadn't heard anything out of the ordinary. No strange sounds or footsteps. Nothing that would have suggested someone had entered my apartment. Yet here I was, standing in the middle of my kitchen, staring at a note that made my blood run cold. How long had they been inside? How much had they seen? I walked to the door, staring at the still open entryway. A wave of unease settled over me, and I stepped back, glancing at the walls and furniture as if expecting someone to jump out from behind them. But there was nothing, just the same quiet apartment, the same soft morning light filtering through the windows. I closed the door slowly, locking it securely behind me, and then took a deep breath, trying to calm the growing sense of panic in my chest. I needed to think. I couldn't let fear control me. I had to figure out what happened and why. I checked the security cameras in my apartment building, hoping they had recorded something that would provide an answer. The footage was grainy, but it showed me leaving my apartment the previous evening and returning around midnight. I saw no one else in the hallways, no strange figures lurking nearby. I rewound the footage, paying extra attention to the hours when I was asleep. But there was nothing unusual. No one entered my apartment, no strange figures hanging around outside my door. Confused and anxious, I decided to call my best friend, hoping she could help me make sense of what had happened. When I explained the situation, she was silent for a moment, as though trying to process it. "Are you sure you locked the door last night?" she asked carefully. "Yes, I'm sure," I replied, my voice tight. "I always lock it. And the note, it doesn't make sense. Who would do something like this?" She paused again before speaking. "I don't know, but it sounds like someone is trying to send you a message. Maybe you should file a police report." The idea of involving the police unsettled me. I hadn't seen any signs of a break-in or theft, and I didn't want to overreact. But the thought of someone being inside my apartment without me knowing was too much to ignore. I agreed to file the report just to be safe. I didn't know who to trust anymore, and I felt like I was losing control over my own space. Later that day, the police came to take a statement. They inspected the apartment, looking for any signs of forced entry, fingerprints, or anything that could point to the person responsible. But like me, they found nothing. No fingerprints, no traces of an intruder. They told me to be cautious and suggested I take extra security measures, but they couldn't offer any answers. The note, it seemed, was all I had. That night, I double-checked every lock in my apartment before going to bed. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching, waiting. My mind raced with theories and possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Who had been inside, and why had they left that note behind? I never found out who had entered my apartment, and the note remained a chilling reminder that I couldn't always be sure of my safety. The door, once a symbol of security, now felt like a vulnerability, and I found myself questioning everything around me. The only thing I knew for sure was that someone had been inside, and they had left behind a message I would never forget. Story 12. It was a quiet night, the kind where the world outside feels still and the only noise is the hum of the refrigerator. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when the call came through. The number was unfamiliar, just a string of digits I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. I didn't expect to hear what came next. "Hello, how are you?" The voice on the other end asked, calm and casual, as if we were old friends. The tone was smooth, neutral, but there was something unsettling about it. I didn't recognize the voice, but it somehow sounded familiar, like I should know who it was. "I see you've just finished dinner. And now you're sitting on your couch, scrolling through your phone. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone what I had eaten or what I was doing. My fingers froze on the screen. "Who is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but my heart was pounding. There was a brief pause before the voice responded, as if considering my question. "It doesn't matter who I am," the voice said. "What matters is what you've been doing. Just a minute ago, you grabbed your coffee mug and took a sip, didn't you? You set it down right next to your laptop." My blood ran cold. I hadn't spoken to anyone in hours, hadn't shared a word about what I was doing. How could they know this? I looked around the room, half expecting to see someone standing there watching me. "What do you want?" I demanded, my throat dry. But the voice didn't answer right away. Instead, it continued, almost as if it was more interested in describing my actions than actually responding to me. "You're still sitting there, thinking about calling the police, aren't you? You're wondering how I know all this." The voice chuckled softly. "You're reaching for your phone now, scrolling through your contacts, considering your options." I froze. It was as if they were inside my head, seeing my every move, reading my thoughts. I didn't know what to make of it. "I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting here," I stammered, my voice shaking. But the voice on the other end didn't seem to care about my denial. Instead, it continued to describe my actions almost in a detached, clinical manner. "You've just stood up. You're walking toward the kitchen now, aren't you?" the voice said. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I stood up, involuntarily following its words. I reached for the kitchen counter, my hand brushing against the cold surface of the granite. "There you go, opening the fridge, grabbing a bottle of water. You're going to take a sip, but you'll put it down after only a few gulps because you're not thirsty anymore. You're too busy trying to figure out who I am." I slammed the fridge door shut and rushed back to the living room, my heart thudding in my chest. The voice was right. Everything it said was happening in real time, and the idea that someone, somewhere, knew everything I was doing was terrifying. I started to feel like I was losing control of the situation. It was like I was trapped inside a nightmare, unable to wake up. "I don't know who you are, but stop," I shouted into the phone, feeling the panic rise in my throat. There was another brief pause on the other end. I thought maybe they had hung up, but then the voice returned, smoother than ever, almost too calm. "You just hung up the phone," it said matter-of-factly. "You're staring at the screen now, trying to decide whether you should call someone else or just ignore it all. You're thinking about your friend Sarah, and whether she would believe you if you told her. You're scared, and I can tell. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere." My hands were trembling as I gripped the phone tightly. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't let someone watch me like this, predict my every move. I wanted to hang up again, but I couldn't. It felt like if I did, it would be like giving in, admitting that this voice, this person, had control over me. "Who are you?" I asked again, this time more desperate. "What do you want?" "I've already told you," the voice said, as if it was amused by my frustration. "It doesn't matter who I am. It matters that I can see you. I know you better than you know yourself. I know all your little habits, your routines. You're just about to pick up the phone again, and you're going to try calling Sarah, aren't you?" My mouth went dry. I hadn't even realized that my hand had moved to the phone again, but the voice was right. It was like they were inside my head, predicting everything before I could even think it. My mind raced as I tried to come up with something, anything, to break the cycle, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. It felt like I was under some kind of control, like the voice knew everything before I did. The next word sent a chill down my spine. "You're thinking of leaving your house now. You're scared, but you're going to walk outside anyway. You look up at the sky and try to take a deep breath to calm yourself. You're not sure if you should drive somewhere or just stay put, but whatever you decide, I'll be here. My entire body went cold as I heard the last part. I'll be here. It was as if they were daring me to leave, daring me to move. The power they seemed to have over me was suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted, watched, tracked every step of the way. Suddenly the call ended. The line went dead, leaving only the sound of my rapid breathing. I stared at the screen of my phone, unsure of what just happened. The eeriness of it all set in, and I was paralyzed with fear. The call hadn't just been a prank, it had been too specific, too accurate. Someone out there knew everything about my life. They had described my movements, my thoughts, as though they were right next to me. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed my coat, my phone in hand, and rushed outside into the cold night air, determined to figure out what was happening. But when I stepped onto the porch, the world outside felt different, too quiet, too still. My mind screamed that I wasn't alone, that the voice wasn't gone. And somehow I knew that it hadn't just been predicting my actions. It was watching me, and it knew where I was going next. Story 13. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. I had been working long hours for the past few weeks, burning the candle at both ends. My job had been demanding, and I was exhausted, constantly running on coffee and adrenaline. It was around the end of the week when I first noticed something strange, a figure standing outside my bedroom window late at night. At first, I thought it was just the result of my sleep-deprived mind playing tricks on me, a figment of exhaustion, nothing more. The figure appeared every night for a few days, standing motionless just beyond the glass. It was always at the same time, around 3 a.m. I'd wake up with a start, my body stiff from the restless sleep I was getting, and glance toward the window. But by the time I gathered the energy to sit up and check, the figure would be gone. My heart would race for a few moments, and then I'd convince myself it was nothing more than the wind or a shadow from a tree. It wasn't until the fourth night that I began to question my rationalizations. I finally decided to install a small security camera by the window, hoping to ease my growing unease. I had no real intention of catching anything strange, just wanted the peace of mind to know I wasn't imagining things. That night, as I drifted into a light sleep, I kept telling myself I'd be fine. The next morning, after a restless night of shifting in and out of sleep, I reviewed the footage. The image on the screen froze my breath in my chest. There, standing in the same spot by the window, was the figure. I could see it clearly now, a tall, shadowy shape with no distinct features. It had no face, no recognizable clothing. It was just an outline, motionless, like a silhouette carved from darkness. I paused the video, my heart pounding. It didn't make sense. How had I not seen it last night? Why hadn't I heard anything? The figure didn't even move. It was just there, standing perfectly still, watching. My first instinct was to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a trick of the camera. Maybe the wind moved something outside. But the more I stared at the footage, the less those excuses held up. That night I stayed awake, staring at the security footage from my phone, waiting for any sign of movement outside the window. The hours dragged on, and the weight of fatigue started to settle back in. I tried to focus, to keep my eyes from closing, but eventually I must have drifted off. The sudden noise of my phone vibrating on the table startled me awake. I grabbed it immediately, checking the time. It was exactly 3 a.m. again. I rewound the footage. There it was, the same figure standing there, as if it had never left. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The figure was standing in the exact same spot, in the exact same posture. It was almost as though it had been waiting for me to catch a glimpse of it, like it had been watching me for days. It was hard to explain, but I felt like it knew I was watching. It didn't move, didn't shift or sway in the breeze. It was frozen in place, as if it had been waiting for me to see it all along. I couldn't breathe as I watched the figure linger outside the window. It felt like time had stopped. I turned the volume up, hoping to hear something, anything that would explain what I was seeing. But there was nothing, not a sound. No rustling, no footsteps, no breath. Just silence and the figure standing there, unmoving. I felt the panic start to rise in my chest. I couldn't explain it, but I felt a deep, gnawing sense of dread. It wasn't just the figure outside my window that scared me, it was the fact that it had been there every single night for a week without my knowing, and I had no idea who or what it was. In a daze, I checked the footage from the previous nights. To my horror, the same figure appeared every night at exactly the same time, standing motionless outside my window. It was as if it had been keeping watch on me, as if it knew the exact moment when I would be asleep enough for it to appear. I couldn't shake the thought that it had been there even longer than I realized, watching me from the shadows before I had even installed the camera. I had to do something. I couldn't just keep watching this thing. It was no longer a matter of curiosity or unease, it was about my safety. I grabbed my phone and called the police. But when I tried to explain what had been happening, the words didn't come out right. How could I explain that I had a figure standing outside my window every night without sounding like I was losing my mind? They reassured me that they would send someone to check out the area, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't going to get any answers. As I waited, I took another look at the footage. But this time, something was different. The figure wasn't standing in its usual spot, it was closer to the window, almost as if it had moved. My heart skipped a beat. I felt the air grow heavy, oppressive, as if something was closing in on me. I quickly glanced out the window, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was gone. There was nothing out there. I checked the footage again. It was as if the figure had never been there. I replayed the footage from all the previous nights, but everything looked normal. No figure, no shadow, no movement. Just me lying in bed, the room empty, the window dark. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it had been a trick of the light. Maybe I had imagined it. But I knew better. I had seen it with my own eyes, and I knew what I had felt. The police never found anything. They said there were no signs of anyone around my house. No unusual activity, no one who had been watching me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched still. It's been days since that night, and the footage is gone, erased, wiped from my phone. I never went back to check the camera. I haven't seen the figure since, but every night I can't help but feel that familiar unease. That sense that something is waiting just outside my window, watching, waiting for me to look back. Story 14. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. I would notice someone walking behind me in crowded places at the mall, in busy shopping districts, or even on the street, but I told myself it was nothing. After all, with so many people around, it was easy to imagine someone following you when they were simply going in the same direction. But as time went on, it started happening more often, and it was hard to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The person always kept a careful distance, never too close, but close enough for me to notice. Sometimes I would glance over my shoulder, and they would stop or turn a corner, as if they had been expecting me to look. I started to wonder if I was just imagining things, maybe I was just hypersensitive, or maybe I was just a little too aware of my surroundings. But no matter how much I told myself it wasn't a big deal, the unease only grew. One afternoon, I stopped at a convenience store to grab a drink. It had been a long day, and I needed something to help me unwind. I walked into the store, lost in my thoughts, when I felt the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was subtle at first, like a brush of air against the back of my neck, a quiet shift in the atmosphere. But as I walked down the aisle toward the refrigerator, I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was following me, just a step behind. I turned my head slightly, trying to be casual, but there, just beyond the end of the aisle, was the figure I had seen in the crowd before. It was the same person, tall, dressed in dark clothes, and always a few paces behind. They didn't make any attempt to hide their presence, and for a moment I froze. I couldn't understand why they kept following me. Was it a coincidence, or something more? I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that they were just another random stranger. But as I reached for a bottle of soda, I heard the faintest whisper behind me. My heart skipped a beat. It was too quiet at first, just barely audible, but I could hear it clearly now. "I know you," the voice said, low and cold. I turned quickly, my stomach dropping. The person was standing a few feet away, their face obscured by the shelves of products. But the voice, soft, almost familiar, had sent a chill down my spine. I tried to brush it off, unsure of whether it was a prank or just my mind playing tricks on me. But then, the whisper came again. "You don't remember me, do you?" I stood there, frozen, unable to move. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Who was this person? Why did they seem to know me? My breath quickened as I realized I was trapped in a small corner of the store, with nowhere to go. I took a step back, my hand shaking as I reached for my phone in my pocket. But before I could even dial for help, the person stepped closer. Without warning, they whispered my name, just loud enough for me to hear. "You're not going anywhere," they said, a cruel edge to their voice. My blood ran cold. I could feel the weight of their words hanging in the air, the tension thick between us. I snapped out of my stupor and turned to leave, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back, afraid of what I might see. I could feel their presence right behind me, the footsteps faint but deliberate. It wasn't just paranoia anymore, it was real. Someone was following me and they knew my name. They knew more than they should. I rushed to the counter, trying to keep my composure. The cashier gave me a curious look as I fumbled with my wallet, paying for the drink with trembling hands. But I couldn't focus on anything other than the feeling that the person was still there, still watching me. I left the store as quickly as I could, stepping out into the daylight, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. But when I glanced behind me, I saw them again, still a few paces behind, keeping their distance. The same figure, watching me from a distance. My stomach twisted in knots as I quickened my pace. Every time I turned a corner or glanced back, they were there. The feeling of being hunted was overwhelming, and it was all I could do to keep walking. I tried to lose them, taking turns down alleyways and side streets, but no matter what I did, the person remained just behind me, never too far away. My heart raced, my hands clammy as I struggled to keep calm. I was sure now that this wasn't just a coincidence. This person wasn't just following me for no reason, they were deliberately tracking me, waiting for the right moment to make their move. I reached a park and paused near the benches, glancing over my shoulder once more. They were standing at the entrance, watching me, still far enough away to not appear threatening, but close enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting for something I wasn't seeing. The seconds felt like hours as I stood there, trying to figure out what to do. Just as I turned to leave, a voice called out from behind me, softer than before. "I've been watching you for so long, don't you remember me?" The words hit me like a punch to the stomach, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. There was something familiar about the voice, but I couldn't place it. It was haunting, and it made my blood run cold. I spun around, but the person was no longer there. They had vanished into the crowd. My pulse raced as I scanned the area, looking for any sign of them. But the park was empty now, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. For a moment I stood still, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. I didn't know who they were, or why they were following me, but I was certain of one thing: I was no longer safe. The sensation of being watched never left me, even as I hurried home. The whispers in the store echoed in my mind, their words twisting and turning into something more sinister. Whoever this person was, they were not going to stop until they got what they wanted. And for the first time, I didn't know if I would ever feel truly safe again. Story 15. I had spent the afternoon at my friend Megan's house, just enjoying a lazy Saturday catching up. We were sitting on her couch, chatting about work and old memories, when she suggested we take a few photos to commemorate the day. Megan had just gotten a new camera, and she was eager to try it out. I agreed, and we snapped a couple of shots, laughing and posing for the lens as we always did. Later that night, I was scrolling through the photos on my phone, laughing at how goofy we looked in some of them. As I swiped through the pictures, I came across one that made me stop. It was a shot of Megan and me sitting on the couch, but in the background, just barely visible, was a figure. The figure was blurry, but its outline was unmistakable. It looked like a person, though the image was too fuzzy to make out any clear details. What struck me as odd was that neither Megan nor I had noticed anyone else in the room when we took the photo. My heart skipped a beat as I zoomed in, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The figure appeared to be standing near the hallway, its face turned away from the camera, shrouded in shadow. It was hard to tell if it was a person or just a trick of the light, but something about it felt off. My first instinct was to call Megan and ask if anyone else had been in the house while we were taking pictures, but I hesitated. We'd been alone when we took the photos, hadn't we? The thought of someone sneaking into the background without either of us noticing was unsettling. I decided to ask Megan about it the next time I saw her. We were texting later that evening, and I brought up the strange figure in the photo, casually mentioning it as a funny anomaly. "Hey, I was looking through the photos from today, and there's this weird figure in the background of one of them. Well, do you know who it is?" I added an emoji to keep the tone light, but my heart was racing as I waited for a response. Her reply came almost immediately, and it was short. "What photo are you talking about?" she asked. Her response felt rushed, almost as if she had been caught off guard. I sent her the picture, along with a note saying, "Is there someone in your hallway? I don't remember seeing anyone while we were taking these." I waited anxiously, but Megan didn't respond for a long time. When she finally did, her message was brief. "Oh, it's probably just a weird reflection or something. I don't worry about it." The way she said it made my unease grow. It was almost too quick, too rehearsed. She had never been one to shy away from talking about strange things before, so why was she suddenly so dismissive? I decided to press her a bit more. "Are you sure? I mean, it doesn't look like a reflection to me. It really looks like a person. Are you sure no one else was there while we were taking pictures?" Her reply came seconds later, almost frantic this time. "I told you, it's nothing. Let's not talk about it, okay?" There was an odd tone to her words, and it sent a chill down my spine. Megan had always been the type to laugh off anything spooky, never one to get nervous over something like a strange figure in a photo. But now she seemed genuinely on edge. I stared at my phone, rereading her messages, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was she hiding something? Why was she so uncomfortable all of a sudden? I felt a sense of unease creep over me as I thought back to that afternoon. Everything had seemed normal. We were laughing, joking, just enjoying each other's company. But now, with the photo in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, I went to bed with the strange figure still on my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Megan had reacted. Something about it felt wrong, like there was something she wasn't telling me. My mind raced with questions. Was the figure just a fluke? Had someone really been in the house without us noticing? Or was it something else entirely, something more sinister? The following week, I saw Megan again at a mutual friend's party. I had been planning to bring up the photo again, but when I arrived, Megan seemed different. She was quieter, almost distant, and her eyes kept flicking nervously around the room. I tried to make casual conversation, but she seemed distracted, like she was avoiding something or someone. At one point during the evening, I caught Megan looking at me from across the room, her face pale. She quickly turned away when our eyes met, and I couldn't help but feel a sudden chill run through me. It was as though she was hiding something from me, something she didn't want me to know. I decided to confront her. "Megan," I said, walking up to her, "is everything okay? You've been acting strange lately." She stiffened, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second. "I'm fine," she said quickly, offering a forced smile. "Just tired, I guess." But there was something in her voice that didn't sound right. It wasn't the usual Megan I knew. She seemed on edge, constantly glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to show up. I decided not to push her further at the party, but the unease lingered. Afterward, I couldn't help but wonder if the strange figure in the photo had anything to do with Megan's odd behavior. Was there something in her house that she didn't want me to know about? Had she been hiding something from me all along? As the days passed, I became more and more convinced that Megan was keeping a secret. I still couldn't shake the feeling that the figure in the photo was a warning of some kind, a signal that something or someone was watching. But no matter how many times I tried to talk to her, Megan seemed determined to avoid the topic. And as time went on, I began to wonder if the answers I was searching for were not something Megan would ever be willing to share. Was the figure just an anomaly, or was it something more? Something that, for reasons I couldn't understand, Megan was too terrified to acknowledge. Story 16. I've always been careful about keeping my windows closed at night. It's a habit I developed after a few unsettling experiences in my early 20s. Every night I would check the locks, pull the blinds down, and make sure everything was secure before heading to bed. The last thing I wanted was to wake up to the feeling that someone had been inside my home while I slept. That night was no different. I made my usual rounds through the house, ensuring all the windows were firmly shut and locked before crawling under the covers. The next morning I woke to a strange, cold draft in the bedroom. At first I didn't think much of it. It was early, and I was still half asleep, trying to adjust to the dim light filtering through the blinds. But then, something caught my eye. My bedroom window, one I was sure I had locked the night before, was wide open. The blinds hung loosely, swaying gently as the wind pushed through. I froze. My stomach dropped, and my heart started to race as I stood up, confused and disoriented. There was no way I could have forgotten to lock it. I always double-checked. I rushed over to the window, my mind spinning as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. The lock was still in place, but it had clearly been undone. The window itself was wide open, as if someone had deliberately opened it during the night. I couldn't understand how it was possible. I remembered locking it before bed, the reassuring click of the latch as I secured it. Yet, here I was, staring at a window that was no longer secure, with the morning breeze coming through like a silent warning. It made no sense. The house was locked up tight when I went to bed, so how could this have happened? I scanned the room, looking for any signs that someone had entered. There was nothing displaced, no sign of forced entry, no signs of a struggle or broken glass. My first thought was that maybe I had simply overlooked it in my tired state the night before, but that didn't feel right. I was always meticulous about checking the locks, especially on the windows, and even if I had missed it somehow, how could the window have been opened without me hearing it? The idea of someone getting into my home undetected made my skin crawl. As I stood there, staring at the open window, I noticed something else that sent a chill down my spine, a faint set of muddy footprints leading away from the window, across the carpet. They were small, just enough to suggest that someone had stepped through the room in the middle of the night. The prints were light, barely noticeable, but there they were, leading from the window and toward the door. My pulse quickened as I followed them, realizing with increasing horror that they led nowhere near the door I had exited in the morning. Instead, they stopped abruptly, as though the person had simply vanished. I retraced my steps from the previous night, but nothing stood out. The house was quiet, still, as if nothing had happened. Yet, everything felt off now. The sense of security I had once taken for granted had been shattered. My mind raced with questions. Was it a break-in attempt? If so, why hadn't they taken anything? Or was it something more disturbing, someone who simply wanted to get in without stealing or causing harm? The possibilities twisted in my mind, each one more unnerving than the last. I quickly closed the window, locking it again and pulling the blinds shut. But the image of the footprints in the open window lingered in my mind. It didn't make sense. I checked the rest of the house, but nothing else seemed disturbed. The back door was locked, the other windows secure. But the feeling of being watched, of being vulnerable, was hard to shake. I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints, the way they seemed to appear out of nowhere, as though whoever had been in my room had vanished into thin air. The entire day, I couldn't focus. Every time I walked past a window or a door, I felt a sharp jolt of unease, as if I was being observed from just beyond my view. The memory of that open window and the footprints haunted me. I tried to reassure myself that it was just a mistake or some odd circumstance, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't just the window, it was the feeling of being violated. The certainty that someone had been in my space without me even knowing it. That night, I locked everything again, but I couldn't shake the fear. I stayed awake longer than usual, listening to the sounds of the house settling, trying to ignore the growing anxiety. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I kept checking the windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. But as I lay in bed, the darkness of the room felt heavier than usual. The sense of being watched never quite left me. I told myself it was just my imagination, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still there, waiting for the right moment. The following days passed in a blur of anxiety. I kept checking the windows, the locks, the doors, anything that could give me some assurance that I was safe. But the sense of unease never faded. I started to feel like I was living in someone else's shadow, always looking over my shoulder, never fully at ease. Whoever had opened that window was still out there, I was sure of it. But who were they? And why hadn't they taken anything? It didn't make sense. I took extra precautions, installing security cameras around the house and doubling down on locking every window before bed. But the unease still lingered. Every time I walked past the window in the morning, the thought that someone might be outside, watching me, crept into my mind. Even though I had taken steps to secure my home, the feeling of vulnerability remained. as if I were a step away from something that could happen at any moment. The open window had shattered my sense of security, and I couldn't seem to rebuild it. It was then that I began to wonder if there was more to this than just a strange incident. Could it be someone I knew? A person from my past who knew exactly how to get in, how to make me feel this sense of creeping dread without ever leaving a trace. The idea of someone I knew invading my space, watching me in the dead of night, filled me with a fear I couldn't easily shake. Whoever they were, they had already made their presence known, and I had no idea what they wanted. All I knew was that it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Story 17. I had been to the diner countless times, the same booth by the window always seeming to call my name when I was in the mood for a warm breakfast and a hot cup of coffee. It was my usual routine, a quiet start to the day before the rush of work and errands consumed my time. That morning was no different, and I slid into my usual seat with a deep sigh, relieved by the comforting familiarity of the place. The diner was almost empty, save for a few regulars scattered around, and I let the calm ambience settle over me. The waitress, a woman with a kind smile and quick hands, walked over and set down my coffee before asking if I was ready to order. I gave her my usual scrambled eggs with toast, and then settled back into the booth to stare out the window. The soft hum of conversation around me blended with the clinking of dishes and the occasional sizzle from the kitchen, creating a comforting soundtrack to my morning ritual. I could already feel the weight of the day slipping away as I waited for my food to arrive. As I sipped my coffee, something caught my eye from across the room. A man was sitting at a booth, tucked away in the far corner. He looked oddly familiar, though I couldn't immediately place where I had seen him before. He was dressed in a dark jacket, his face partially obscured by a hat that sat low over his eyes. He was alone, and there was something unsettling about the way he sat so still, as though waiting for something or someone. I shook the feeling off, thinking that maybe I was just imagining things. After all, this diner was a local hangout, and it wasn't unusual for people to come in and out of the place. I turned my attention back to my coffee, trying to focus on the warmth in my hands, but something kept nagging at me. As I glanced up again, my heart skipped a beat when I saw the man's eyes fixed directly on me. I froze, feeling an icy chill wash over me. It was the same man from yesterday. I had seen him in the exact same booth at the same time, sitting in the same stillness. The strange part was that I had sworn I had never seen him before, and yet here he was again, staring at me from across the room. His gaze was unblinking, almost unnaturally so, and it felt like a weight pressing down on me. I tried to shake it off, but it was impossible to ignore the feeling of being watched. I shifted in my seat, looking away, hoping that if I didn't acknowledge him, the whole thing would pass. But when I dared to glance up once more, I saw that he hadn't moved a muscle. He was still staring at me, his eyes locked on mine as if waiting for me to do something. Anything. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way he watched me that sent a chill down my spine. I tried to distract myself, reaching for the newspaper that had been left on the table next to me, but my eyes kept darting back to him. He was still there, still watching. I couldn't understand it. Why was he staring at me? What did he want? My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer, but the longer I sat there, the more I felt like I was caught in a strange, uncomfortable trap. The waitress returned with my food, and I forced myself to smile at her as she set the plate down in front of me. I tried to act normal, to pretend that nothing was wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the man across the room was still watching. I could feel his eyes on me, even though I was trying so hard to ignore him. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one feeling like an eternity as I poked at my eggs, trying to force myself to eat. When I finally looked up again, the man was gone. The booth across from me was empty, and the air seemed to shift as if something had been lifted. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, though it was quickly replaced by confusion. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I just tired or overly paranoid? It was hard to tell, but the strange feeling that had settled in my chest lingered long after he was gone. As I finished my meal, I tried to push the encounter out of my mind. I paid my bill, left a tip for the waitress, and stood up to leave. But as I walked toward the door, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the window. There, just outside the diner, was the same man from across the room. He was standing by his car, watching me once again. My heart skipped a beat as I froze in place. The man didn't move, didn't acknowledge me at all, but I could feel his presence like a shadow hovering over me. I quickly turned and stepped out the door, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I tried to shake off the feeling of being followed, telling myself that it was just a coincidence. But deep down, I couldn't deny the strange unease that had settled in my gut. I didn't look back as I walked to my car, but I could feel his eyes on me the entire time. I had no idea who this man was or why he had been watching me, but something told me that I wasn't going to forget this encounter anytime soon. And as I drove away from the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't seen the last of him. There was something about the way he had watched me, the way he seemed to know exactly where I would be, that left me unsettled, as if this was only the beginning of something I wasn't prepared for. Story 18. It was a quiet afternoon when I thought I was alone in the house. The kind of peaceful silence that only comes when no one else is around. I had spent the day doing small chores, tidying up here and there, and catching up on a book one had started weeks ago. I was enjoying the solitude, the rhythmic sound of the pages turning, and the warmth of the sun filtering through the curtains. But that peace was shattered when I heard a knock at the front door. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe a neighbor or a delivery person, I thought. I wasn't expecting anyone, but sometimes people stop by unannounced. I set my book down, stretched, and made my way toward the door. The knock came again, more urgent this time, followed by a moment of silence. I hesitated for a split second before reaching for the doorknob. When I opened the door, I was met with nothing but the empty porch. The street was quiet, no one in sight. My heart skipped a beat, a wave of unease washing over me. I glanced around just to be sure no one was hiding nearby, but there was no one. I stood there for a moment, confused and slightly unsettled, before my gaze fell to the ground in front of me. On the porch just in front of the door was a small package. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a thin string. The package was unremarkable in every way, except for one detail. It had my name written on it, in what looked like neat, careful handwriting. There was no return address, no explanation, just my name, clearly printed in black ink. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I picked it up. My instincts told me to leave it there, to call someone, but curiosity got the better of me. What could it be? Who would leave something like this at my door? I turned the package over in my hands, inspecting it more closely, but it was simple, no sign of anything unusual or dangerous. My mind raced with thoughts of possible explanations. A gift from a friend, a mix-up with a delivery, but nothing seemed to make sense. Why would someone leave it without a note or even a word? I stepped back inside, closing the door behind me. Holding the package, I walked to the kitchen, my eyes fixed on the brown paper. It wasn't heavy, but there was something about the way it felt, something that made me feel like I was holding more than just a simple parcel. With a deep breath, I placed it on the kitchen table and untied the string, tearing open the paper carefully. Inside there was a single photograph. I froze when I saw it. It was a picture of me taken while I was sleeping. My heart nearly stopped, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. The photo was so clear, so unsettling. I could see the room around me, my face relaxed in sleep, my hair spread across the pillow. It was taken from a distance, not too far, but enough to make it obvious that whoever had taken it was watching me. I didn't recognize the angle, and I knew for certain that I hadn't seen anyone in the room when I had gone to bed the night before. The chill in the room seemed to deepen as my mind spun with thoughts. How had someone gotten into my house? I checked every window before I went to bed. There were no signs of forced entry. Could it have been someone from outside? Maybe someone with a camera trained on my window. But the more I thought about it, the less I could convince myself that it was just a coincidence. I stared at the photo for a long time, unable to look away. The image itself was so normal, but it felt like it carried some terrible weight. It was as though whoever had taken it knew me better than I knew myself. My fingers trembled as I set the photo down on the table. I tried to gather my thoughts, to rationalize it, but all I could come up with was a growing sense of dread. I looked at the front door again, wondering if the person who had left the package was still nearby, watching me. But there was no one. The house was as quiet as it had been before. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? Someone left a package with a picture of me sleeping, but I don't know who. It didn't seem like enough to go on. I sat down at the table, feeling more exposed than I ever had before. The walls of the room felt suddenly too thin, the space too small. I couldn't shake the image of the photo, the feeling that someone had been in my house without me knowing it. Had they been watching me for a while? Had this been the first time, or was this just the beginning? The unsettling nature of the photograph nagged at me as I tried to push aside the fear. Who could have done this? Why me? It didn't make sense. I tried to convince myself that it was just a weird prank, that it was some misguided joke, but my gut told me otherwise. There was a feeling in my stomach that I couldn't ignore. I felt violated, exposed in a way I never had before. How could I have been so unaware? How had I missed someone watching me? The silence in the room was deafening. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me from my thoughts. I jumped, startled by the sudden sound. I reached for it quickly, trying to shake off the lingering anxiety that had settled in my chest. It was just a message from a friend, asking how I was doing. I quickly typed a reply, but my mind was elsewhere. Every sound seemed to be amplified now. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car outside, every gust of wind, it all felt ominous. I knew I couldn't stay in the house, not after what had happened. I needed to leave, to go somewhere safe, to figure out what was going on. But before I could stand up, I heard it again, the sound of a knock at the door. This time it was gentle, almost tentative, but it was unmistakable. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know who it was this time. My mind raced with possibilities, but nothing seemed to make sense. I couldn't open the door, not now, not after what had happened. Whoever was out there knew too much. And as I sat there staring at the door, I realized that the worst part of all wasn't the package. It was the thought that they were still out there, watching me, waiting for me to open the door. Story 19. I've always been cautious about my online privacy. I never overshare on social media, keep my passwords secure, and double-check the privacy settings on every app I use. I assumed I had a solid system in place, one that kept my personal information out of the wrong hands. But one evening, as I scrolled through my messages, something unexpected stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a message from an old acquaintance, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. The text was simple at first, just a casual greeting, but as I read further, a cold wave of unease washed over me. The message went on to mention things I had never posted online, details about my life that I had only shared in private conversations, ones I thought were secure. They referred to a trip I had taken months ago, describing the places I visited with eerie accuracy. It was unsettling, but what truly terrified me was the way they phrased it. "I've been following you online for months now. It's been fascinating watching you." My fingers hovered over the phone screen, the words swimming in front of me. I reread the message, thinking there must be some mistake, some glitch, or perhaps a misunderstanding. But it didn't make sense. I had been careful, so careful, to limit what I shared online. How could they know about these personal conversations, these private moments? It was as if they had been listening in on my life, tracking my every move without me ever knowing. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to just block the person and move on, but something about the way they spoke, the familiarity they seemed to have with my life, kept me frozen in place. It wasn't just a random stalker or a creepy prank. This person knew me, or at least they knew things about me that no one should have had access to. As the seconds ticked by, my mind raced. Had my accounts been hacked? Was someone monitoring my private conversations, reading my emails, tracking my online activity? I began retracing my steps, thinking of any possible way they could have gathered this information. I had always been cautious about what I shared, but was I really as careful as I thought? I checked my privacy settings on all my social media accounts. Everything was locked down, or so I believed. I reviewed the apps on my phone, wondering if one of them could have been silently collecting data. I even scanned my email for any strange activity, looking for any signs that someone had gained access to my personal information. But nothing stood out. My accounts appeared secure, and yet the message still sat there, looming like a threat I couldn't ignore. I looked at the name of the sender again, an old friend from high school, someone I had only spoken to a few times in the years since graduation. We weren't close, and I couldn't remember the last time we'd actually had a conversation. The idea that they had been watching me for months felt absurd. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that they were no stranger to my life. They knew things that I hadn't shared publicly, and that terrified me. I hesitated before responding, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to demand answers, to ask how they had been tracking me, but another part of me was terrified of the truth. If they could track me this easily, what else were they capable of? I decided to keep it brief, testing the waters. "How have you been following me?" I typed, my fingers trembling as I hit send. The response came almost instantly. "I've got my ways," they replied cryptically. "It's easy to see what people are up to these days. You'd be surprised how much is out there for anyone who's paying attention." I could almost feel the smugness in their words, the calm confidence that they had me cornered. It wasn't just about the information they were playing a game, and I was the target. Panic started to set in. I thought about everything I had done in the past few months, every detail of my life that I had shared, whether it was in private conversations, through texts, or even casual chats with friends. Was I really as careful as I thought? Had I shared too much, let slip something I shouldn't have? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had allowed myself to trust the digital world, how much I had taken for granted. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to clear my head. I felt helpless, exposed in a way I couldn't explain. How could someone have this kind of access to my life? My thoughts raced, searching for answers, but none of them felt reassuring. This wasn't just about someone knowing a few things about me. This person had been tracking me, monitoring my life, and I had no idea how long it had been going on. I decided to block the number and take extra precautions. I changed my passwords, tightened my privacy settings even further, and even took the step of reviewing every app I used. But deep down, I knew that wasn't enough. What if this was just the tip of the iceberg? What if someone had already infiltrated my life, and I was only beginning to see the evidence? The message from my acquaintance kept replaying in my mind, the words "I've been following you" echoing like a warning I couldn't shake. It wasn't just about online privacy anymore, it was about control. Someone had been watching, listening, waiting. I didn't know how they had done it, but I could feel their presence, lurking in the corners of my digital life, and I wasn't sure how to escape it. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I checked my phone, every time I opened an app, I felt a sense of unease. It was as though the world had become smaller, more claustrophobic. And yet I still couldn't figure out how they had done it, how they had accessed my life without my knowledge. All I knew for certain was that I wasn't as safe as I thought. And the next time I received a message, I wasn't sure I'd be ready for what came next. Story 20. It started with a text that seemed like a mistake. A number I didn't recognize sent me a simple message: "You'll be wearing your red jacket today." At first, I laughed it off. It was an odd coincidence because I had planned on wearing that exact jacket. I brushed it aside, assuming it was just a prank or some random spam message. But when I checked my phone again later, another text popped up. The next message was just as strange. "You'll have coffee with your friend Sarah at the usual cafe at 10:30 a.m. I paused. Sarah and I had been friends for years, and we had made plans earlier that week to meet at our usual cafe. But no one but Sarah and I knew about it. I felt a prickling sensation run down my spine, and I double-checked the sender. It was still the same number, one I hadn't saved or recognized. I considered blocking the number, but something kept me from doing it. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I wanted to see if this was just an elaborate prank. So I went ahead with my plans. I wore the red jacket and met Sarah at the cafe. When I arrived, she looked surprised but didn't say anything about the strange coincidence. We had a good time, talking about work and life. But as I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, I received another message. "Tonight you'll take a walk through the park at dusk, and you'll bump into Tom." I frowned. Tom was an old acquaintance from college who I hadn't seen in months. The idea of running into him at the park felt oddly specific. I had no plans to go to the park, and yet I found myself there that evening. As I walked along the familiar path, the air cool and quiet, I spotted someone familiar standing near the fountain. It was Tom. He waved, and I waved back, too stunned to speak. Tom smiled and approached me. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice filled with surprise. "But I'm glad I did." I felt my mouth go dry. Yeah, I didn't plan on coming either. I couldn't help but feel the weight of the text from earlier in my mind. How had it known? How had it predicted that I would bump into Tom? The text came before I had even considered walking in the park. I tried to brush it off, but the thought of the message lingered in the back of my mind. Over the next few days, the texts continued. Each one was more specific, more eerie than the last. "Tomorrow you'll wear your green scarf and meet your sister at the bookstore." I had already planned on going to the bookstore with my sister, but the idea that someone could predict my actions was starting to feel suffocating. It was as if someone was watching my every move, keeping track of my plans before I even made them. I started to feel like I was being controlled, as if my life wasn't my own anymore. The next morning, the message came true again. I wore the green scarf without even thinking about it, and I met my sister at the bookstore. We spent hours browsing through the aisles, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. I kept checking my phone, half expecting to receive another message about my next move. When I returned home that evening, I noticed something different. There was a new message waiting for me. "You'll have a strange encounter tonight. It will happen at 9 p.m. I looked at the time. It was already 8:45 p.m. The sense of dread that had been building up in me for days started to spike. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to face whatever was coming. But I couldn't ignore the message. I had no choice but to wait. I sat in my living room, watching the clock tick down to 9 p.m., my heart pounding in my chest. At exactly 9 p.m., I heard a knock on my door. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't been expecting anyone. I cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. There was no one standing there. Just as I started to relax, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. My phone buzzed again, and I jumped. The message read, "Don't worry, it's just me." I felt a wave of nausea hit me. Who was this person? How did they know exactly where I was, what I was doing, and when? I opened the door slowly, my hand shaking. Standing on the other side was a person I didn't recognize. They were tall, dressed in dark clothes, and their face was partially obscured by a hood. They didn't speak, just stood there silently. The only sound was the low hum of the streetlights outside. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent, my heart racing in my chest. The stranger stepped forward, but before they could say anything, they handed me a slip of paper. "See you tomorrow," they said softly before turning and walking away. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the paper in my hand. When I opened it, there was no name, just another message. "You'll be at the cafe at 2 p.m., sitting alone." I shuddered. I couldn't do this anymore. Whoever was behind these texts was too close. They were getting too familiar with my life. I couldn't let it continue. The next morning, I blocked the number. I changed my phone number entirely and began to distance myself from the patterns the texts had followed. But the memories of those texts, the feeling of being watched, the sense of dread that hung over every interaction never left me. I still found myself double-checking my phone, wondering if someone was still tracking my every move. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar face I encountered, felt like a reminder of that time when my life was no longer my own. The texts stopped, but the fear never really did. Story 21. The email arrived late in the afternoon, while I was finishing up a project at work. I'd been in the zone all day, focused on meeting deadlines and pushing through meetings. My phone buzzed, signaling a new email, and I glanced over at the screen. The subject line caught my attention immediately. "Urgent, you're being watched." The wording made my stomach drop, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, the dread creeping up the back of my neck. Inside the email, there was a brief, chilling message: "You're being watched. Click the link below to see for yourself." Beneath the message, a link was provided. My heart raced as my finger hovered over the mouse. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. Was this a prank? Some kind of elaborate joke from a colleague? Or was this something far worse? The sheer bluntness of the subject line and the unsettling tone of the email made it impossible to ignore, but I felt an overwhelming sense of unease at the same time. I clicked the link. The page that opened was minimalistic, almost too simple. It showed a live stream of a room that looked eerily familiar. I blinked several times trying to make sense of it. At first, I thought it might have been a mistake, a random video feed or a glitch. But as the camera panned, I recognized the room. It was my living room. The same couch I bought just a year ago. The same coffee table I had been too lazy to replace. The same window through which I had spent countless mornings watching the world outside. My breath hitched as I leaned closer to the screen, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. I felt like the room was closing in around me. The camera wasn't shaking like a typical security camera feed. It was steady, deliberate. Whoever was controlling it had been there for a while. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. How could someone be inside my house? Had I left a window open? Had I accidentally allowed someone to sneak in while I was away? I quickly minimized the tab and ran to my phone to check my home security app, which had always given me peace of mind. But when I logged in, all the cameras were showing nothing out of the ordinary. No footage of a break-in, no unusual activity. Everything appeared to be exactly as it should be. I checked the email again. The sender's address was unfamiliar, nothing in my work contact list. No employee names or department identifiers. It was a generic address that looked almost fake. My anxiety skyrocketed as I realized this wasn't just a random message, it was targeted. But why? I wasn't anyone special. I was a regular employee at a marketing firm, and while I had a small circle of colleagues, nothing about me screamed important. So why would someone be watching me? I turned back to the live stream, my fingers trembling as I hovered over the play button. The feed was still active, and the camera had now moved to show my kitchen, my dining table, and the hallway leading to my bedroom. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. There was no doubt now. Someone had set up a camera inside my house, possibly even hidden it without my knowledge. I was watching the very space where I felt safest being invaded in the most intimate way. It was too much to bear. I sat there, frozen in place for a long moment, trying to steady my breathing. What was I supposed to do? Who could I even call? My phone was in my hand, but the words didn't come. I considered calling the police. But what would I tell them? That someone had set up a secret camera in my home and was now live streaming it for fun. It sounded like something out of a paranoid nightmare, but the evidence was right in front of me. Just as I was about to shut down the page and try to regain some sense of control, the camera moved again. This time it zoomed in on my front door, which was slightly ajar. The angle was so precise, so controlled, that it made my skin crawl. Whoever had set this up was no amateur. They knew exactly where to place the camera, how to access my home, and what to record. There was no telling how long they had been watching me. How many nights had I fallen asleep thinking I was alone, when someone could have been just outside my door, watching me from afar? The logical part of my brain screamed at me to call the police. Yet, a strange part of me, an instinct I couldn't shake, was terrified of drawing attention to myself. The idea that someone could be watching me made me feel like a puppet, helplessly controlled from the shadows. I needed to find out who was behind this before I did anything rash. I quickly shut down the live stream and stared at the blank screen of my computer. The silence around me felt deafening now, almost suffocating. There had to be something more I could do. Something. I opened a new tab and started searching for any clues. I knew that whoever had sent that email could have used my public social media accounts to find out where I lived or what I did. But how could they have set up a camera in my apartment without my noticing? Had they been inside while I was out? Had they been watching me for weeks? I felt a growing sense of dread that was impossible to shake. I closed my laptop and grabbed my phone, heading straight for the door. I needed to get out of the apartment. I needed to breathe. As I stepped outside, I called my closest friend, hoping she could talk some sense into me. She answered on the second ring. I quickly explained what had happened: the email, the live stream, the camera. I expected her to laugh it off, to tell me I was overreacting. But her silence only confirmed my worst fear. This wasn't something I could easily dismiss. She suggested I go straight to the police, but I hesitated. What if they couldn't do anything? What if I was overreacting? But as I thought about it, I realized I couldn't live in fear, waiting for someone to show up uninvited. I needed help. Help. I went to the police station, showing them the email and the footage I had captured before shutting it down. The officers were concerned, and I could see their growing alarm as I explained the situation. They promised to investigate and track down the source of the email, as well as any security footage from my building that might help them identify who had been watching me. But even with their reassurances, I couldn't help feeling like I had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. As I left the station, my phone buzzed again. I hesitated before checking the screen. Another email from the same unknown sender. This time it read, "I'll be watching again soon." Story 22. The night had been long, the kind of shift that drained every ounce of energy, leaving me barely able to focus as I drove home. I couldn't wait to collapse into bed, let the exhaustion wash over me, and forget about the world for a few hours. When I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed something strange. The lights in my apartment were on. I was certain I had turned them off before I left. A feeling of unease crept over me, but I chalked it up to exhaustion and made my way inside. The door clicked shut behind me, and I hesitated for a moment, scanning the apartment. The lights in the living room, kitchen, and hallway all glowed brightly, casting long shadows against the walls. I set my keys down on the table and walked through the rooms, checking to make sure nothing was out of place. Everything seemed normal: furniture in its usual spot, nothing disturbed. Still, that nagging feeling didn't go away. It was like someone had been here, but I couldn't put my finger on why or how. I moved through the apartment slowly, flicking off the lights as I went, trying to convince myself it was just the fatigue playing tricks on my mind. I entered the bedroom, the soft glow of the bedside lamp casting a warm light on the room. It looked untouched, just as I had left it. But as I crossed to the bathroom, I noticed something odd. The mirror, which I always kept clean, had a thin layer of fog on it. I frowned, confused. I hadn't used the bathroom in hours. Who could have been here? I wiped the fog away with my sleeve and stared at my reflection. My eyes were tired, bloodshot, and the dim light made my face look drawn. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I kept telling myself it was just the result of a long night and too little sleep. I finished in the bathroom and stepped back into the hallway, deciding to head to the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, almost like a whisper. It was soft but unmistakable, the sound of breathing. It came from the closet at the end of the hallway. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. My first thought was that maybe I had left a window open, and the wind was causing some noise. But the sound was too steady, too rhythmic to be the wind. It was the sound of someone or something breathing. Slowly, my feet moved toward the closet, each step feeling heavier than the last. I reached the closet door and paused, listening. The breathing continued, shallow but constant, like someone was hiding inside, trying to remain quiet. I felt a chill run through my body, my breath catching in my throat. I considered calling the police, but what could I say? That I thought someone was hiding in my closet, but I wasn't sure. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. The thought of opening that door made my stomach turn. Gathering my courage, I took a deep breath and slowly reached for the doorknob. My hand trembled as I grasped it, but I forced myself to turn it. The door creaked open, revealing a darkened space filled with coats and shoes. The breathing sound was louder now, almost right in front of me. I pushed the door open fully, the air in the closet cool and musty, and my eyes scanned the shadows. There was no one there. There. I blinked, confused. The closet was empty, nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of someone hiding. The breathing had stopped, leaving only the silence of the apartment around me. I stood there for a moment, staring into the dark corners, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Was it the fatigue playing tricks on my mind? But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A small, indistinct mark on the floor near the back of the closet. It was subtle, but there was something off about it, like someone had been standing there, shifting their weight. I crouched down, running my fingers over the mark. It was faint, as though something or someone had been there recently. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. I didn't want to believe it, but the strange feeling in my gut told me that something wasn't right. I stepped back from the closet, the weight of the moment settling in. The apartment was quiet again, but the silence felt oppressive, like something was waiting in the shadows, just out of sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that whatever had been breathing in my closet was still nearby. I felt like I was being watched, though I couldn't see anyone, couldn't hear a thing. I hurried to the kitchen, trying to distract myself with a glass of water, but my hands were still trembling. As I drank, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. The apartment felt different now, like the air had changed, become thick and heavy. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just my nerves. But every little sound, every shift in the air, made my skin crawl. I knew I had to find a way to calm down, to rationalize what had just happened. But then I heard it again. A soft tapping noise, almost imperceptible at first, coming from the closet. It was like a nail gently tapping against wood, but it was rhythmic, deliberate. My heart stopped, and I slowly turned to face the closet, the sound growing louder, more persistent. There was no mistaking it now, someone was still in there. I stood frozen for a moment, too terrified to move. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to escape, but my feet were rooted to the floor. The tapping continued, and then, without warning, the door to the closet slammed shut. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat, and I bolted for the front door. My mind screamed at me to get out, to leave the apartment before whatever was in there came after me. I grabbed my keys from the table and rushed outside, my pulse racing. The night air hit my face, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I was able to breathe. I didn't know what had been in that closet, or who had been breathing in my apartment, but I wasn't going back inside to find out. I stood there in the cold, my hands shaking, the eerie feeling of being watched never quite leaving me. I don't know if it was just my mind playing tricks, or if something more sinister had been lurking in that apartment. All I knew was that I couldn't go back in there. Not yet. Something had changed, and I wasn't sure if I ever would feel safe in that place again. Story 23. It started on a quiet evening, just like any other. I was scrolling through my social media feed, half-heartedly liking posts, replying to a few comments, and wasting time while dinner simmered on the stove. The notifications were typical friends posting about their day, random ads, nothing unusual. But then I received a message that stood out, unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was from a stranger, someone I didn't know, someone with a vague profile picture, a silhouette, no name, just a random string of numbers. The message was simple, but the words struck me cold. I know about your job, your apartment, and I know you're planning a trip next week to the mountains. I stared at the screen, confusion and unease slowly creeping in. I hadn't shared any vacation plans publicly. In fact, I hadn't told anyone except a few close friends. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. The stranger listed the name of my employer, the exact dates of my vacation, and even the name of the hotel I'd booked for the trip. It felt like they had been watching me, or worse, like they were inside my life, observing everything I did. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank or some sort of scam. Maybe it was just a coincidence. People had weird ways of gathering information, public records, hacked accounts, or maybe someone had overheard me talking about my plans. But then the message continued. I can't wait to see you there, the stranger added. I know where you'll be staying, and I know what time you'll arrive. That sentence sent a shiver down my spine. I felt the weight of their words sink in. This wasn't some harmless joke. Someone, somehow, had been following my every move. I immediately checked the privacy settings on all my social media accounts. Everything was locked down tight, or so I thought. There were no new followers I didn't recognize, no strange interactions. Still, the nagging feeling of being watched lingered. I considered blocking the stranger, but something stopped me. I was too curious. How did they know so much about me? I scrolled through their profile again, trying to find some trace of identity, some clue that would explain their knowledge of my life. But there was nothing, just a blank page, a few likes on random posts, and that eerie silhouette of a profile picture. The next day, I woke up feeling uneasy. I hadn't been able to shake the feeling from the night before. Was it possible someone had been tracking me for longer than I realized? My daily routine hadn't changed. I went to work, took the same route, and had the same conversations. Nothing out of the ordinary. But the thought of someone knowing intimate details about my life was enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went over every interaction I had had recently, trying to figure out if there were any clues, any slip-ups that could have led to this stranger's knowledge. I told a few friends about the message, hoping they'd offer some reassurance. Most of them brushed it off, thinking it was a glitch or a random coincidence. But one friend, Sarah, was more concerned. Have you tried looking at your phone's security settings? She asked. Sometimes apps can leak information without you even knowing. Maybe there's a breach somewhere. Her suggestion made sense, so I spent the rest of the evening checking my devices, updating passwords, and ensuring everything was locked down. But the more I looked, the more questions I had. Could someone have gained access to my personal information without my knowledge? That night, the stranger messaged me again. This time it was even more unsettling. I saw you walking down the street today. You looked distracted. You didn't even notice me standing in the alley. I froze, my heart pounding. I hadn't noticed anyone. I had walked to the store that afternoon, my mind on something else entirely. But I couldn't remember seeing anyone in the alley, let alone someone who would have been paying attention to me. It was starting to feel like a bad dream. My thoughts raced. Was I being stalked? Was this person lurking in the shadows, watching my every move? Or was it all just a bizarre coincidence? The next morning I went to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being on edge. Every time I passed a window, I half expected to see a figure standing outside watching me. I kept checking my phone, watching for another message, but there was nothing. The day went by in a blur, and by the time I got home, I had convinced myself that it was all in my head. Maybe I was just stressed, overthinking things. Still, the odd messages lingered at the back of my mind. That night, however, things took a darker turn. As I sat in my living room, I heard a faint tapping on my window. I froze, staring at the glass, half expecting to see someone's shadow on the other side. But there was nothing. I waited, my heart pounding, but the noise didn't come again. I shook my head, trying to push the fear away. It was probably just a branch brushing against the window. Yet, as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I couldn't help but feel like someone was watching me. The air felt thick, heavy with the sense that I wasn't alone. I checked my phone one more time before I went to sleep. There was another message. "I saw you through the window just now. You're not as alone as you think." My blood ran cold. I hadn't posted anything about my whereabouts, and there was no way the stranger could have known I was home. Panic surged through me as I jumped up from the couch, looking around the room, my heart racing. I rushed to the door and locked it, even though I knew it wouldn't stop whatever was happening. I felt like I was trapped in my own home, my privacy violated by someone who seemed to know every detail of my life. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I called the police and reported the strange messages and the unsettling experiences. They seemed skeptical at first, but after I showed them the messages, they promised to investigate. They advised me to be cautious, to stay vigilant. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this person was always one step ahead of me. I had no idea who they were, how they knew so much, or what they wanted. But I knew one thing for sure: this was far from over. Story 24. I had always enjoyed hiking alone. It gave me a sense of peace, a chance to disconnect from the chaos of everyday life and spend time with my thoughts. That day I had set out on a trail I'd walked many times before, but something felt different. The air was thick with humidity, and the forest seemed unnaturally quiet, as if waiting for something. I brushed it off as nothing more than a shift in my own mood, a passing thought as I ventured deeper into the woods. After a few hours of walking, I found myself at a fork in the trail. It wasn't marked, and for a moment, I hesitated, wondering which way to go. I trusted my instincts, as I always did, and chose the path to the left. It didn't look like one I had walked before, but I convinced myself it was just an extension of the usual trail. The trees towered above me, their branches woven so tightly that they blocked out most of the sunlight. The path was narrow, winding, and as I continued, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I walked for what felt like miles, but the trail never seemed to end. The farther I went, the more the forest closed in around me. I tried to keep track of landmarks, looking for any sign that I was still on a familiar path, but everything began to blur. The trees all looked the same, and the air became heavier, pressing down on me with every step. It wasn't until I stopped to catch my breath that I realized how quiet it had become. There were no birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. The silence was suffocating. I reached for my map, but I couldn't find it. I checked every pocket of my backpack, my heart starting to race as panic began to seep in. I had no way of knowing where I was. My phone had no signal, and I had no choice but to rely on my instincts. I decided to backtrack, retracing my steps in hopes of finding the familiar fork in the path, but the forest seemed different now. The trees were denser, the shadows deeper. It was as if the woods had changed since I first arrived. That's when I heard a snap of a twig, faint but distinct, I froze, my eyes darting around, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. It came again, closer this time, followed by a low rustling in the underbrush. My heart thudded in my chest, and I instinctively took a step back. There was no wind, no animals, just the sound of someone or something moving in the woods. I wasn't alone. I tried to tell myself it was just a deer, or maybe a hiker who had taken a wrong turn as well. But then the noise stopped, and I could feel that someone was watching me. I didn't know how I knew, but the sensation crawled up my spine, making my skin prickle. I stood still, straining to hear anything, but the silence returned, deep and unsettling. I forced myself to keep moving, but now every sound, every crack of a branch, made my heart race. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The more I tried to stay calm, the more the sounds grew, footsteps that seemed to match my pace, soft and deliberate, just out of sight. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing. But the air felt thick, charged, like something was lurking just beyond my vision, waiting for the right moment to strike. I quickened my pace, hoping to get back to the main trail, but the sounds only grew louder, closer. A twig snapped in front of me, followed by a sudden rush of movement. I spun around, breath caught in my throat, but again there was nothing. My mind was playing tricks on me, I told myself. I was lost, and the fear was starting to cloud my judgment. I kept walking, my legs burning with fatigue, but the sense of being pursued never left. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, moving in tandem with mine. I stopped dead in my tracks, my pulse pounding in my ears. They were too deliberate to be the random sounds of animals. This was someone, and they were following me. I glanced around, my eyes scanning the trees, but saw nothing. I wanted to scream, to call out, but the words caught in my throat. There was something about the stillness of the woods, something that kept me from speaking. I tried to shake off the feeling and move faster, but the footsteps followed, just out of view, keeping pace with me. I thought I could hear a faint whisper, like someone was speaking to me, but I couldn't make out the words. My legs began to feel like lead, and I stumbled over a rock, nearly falling. I caught myself, but the fear was growing now, gnawing at the edges of my mind. My eyes darted back and forth, but there was no one there. I realized then that the person or whatever it was wasn't trying to catch up to me. They were staying just far enough behind to make sure I couldn't escape, to keep me in a state of terror. I started running, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my feet crashing through the underbrush. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get out. The forest closed in around me, the trees pressing in, blocking any view of the sky. It felt like I was running in circles, but the footsteps never stopped. Suddenly there was a sharp crack, and I stumbled into a clearing. I looked around desperately, but there was still no sign of the trail, no sign of anything familiar. Just the looming trees, the thick underbrush, and the sound of my own ragged breathing. And then another whisper, just behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. I could feel the presence, the weight of it, standing just beyond my vision. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "You'll never leave." I froze. The voice was low, menacing, and it sent a wave of ice through my veins. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. The fear had paralyzed me, and I realized in that moment that I was completely at the mercy of whatever was out there with me. I tried to call out, but my throat felt dry, my voice strangled by fear. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the footsteps stopped. The whispering ceased. The forest was silent once again, the oppressive weight of the air lifting just enough for me to take a shaky breath. I stood there, waiting for something, anything to happen, but nothing came. The silence was deafening. I didn't dare move. I couldn't bring myself to leave the clearing, not knowing if the presence would return, if the footsteps would start again. I stood there for what felt like hours, my body stiff with fear. And then, just as the sun began to dip behind the trees, I heard something, a voice, far off in the distance. A voice that sounded familiar. A voice that wasn't mine. Story 25. The first letter arrived a few weeks ago. I had just moved into a new apartment, and the first few days had been quiet, with the usual settling and unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and getting used to the creaks of the old building. The letter was addressed to me, but the name on the envelope wasn't one I recognized. It simply read for your full name, with no return address, no stamp. I opened it, wondering if it was some sort of mistake, but the message inside was simple: I've been watching you. I stared at the note for a few moments, trying to understand what I had just read. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar, and there was no explanation, no context. At first I chalked it up to a weird prank. It didn't feel threatening, just odd. Maybe it was some weird kind of joke from a neighbor. I shrugged it off, deciding not to let it get to me, but deep down I felt a flicker of unease. Over the next few days, more letters started arriving. Each one had a different message, and each one felt like it was getting progressively stranger. The notes were always unsigned, always written in that same neat handwriting. I see you walk to your car every morning, one said. Another, your blinds were half open when you left this afternoon. It was as if the person knew my every move, but still, I convinced myself that it was just some overzealous neighbor, or maybe someone bored with too much time on their hands. But as the letters continued, I started noticing things that made me more uncomfortable. The timing of the letters seemed deliberate. They arrived exactly when I'd been out of the apartment for a while, and the observations they made were eerily specific. They knew the exact times I left in the morning, when I returned in the evening, even the path I walked down the street. The handwriting, too, never changed, making it even harder to dismiss as a prank. It wasn't just a note anymore, it felt like an obsession. Then, one afternoon, I opened the mailbox to find the usual letter, but this one was different. It wasn't like the others. It was smaller, folded carefully, and addressed simply to apartment 3 billion. No name, no return address. I felt my stomach twist as I opened it, half expecting to see another cryptic message. But this time, there were only a few words: I'm closer than you think. I froze. I had been expecting another observation, maybe a comment on my appearance or the time I'd gone to the store. But this felt different. It wasn't just a message. It was a warning. I felt a chill race down my spine as I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me. The apartment was eerily silent. No footsteps, no sounds from the neighbors, just the oppressive quiet of the building. For the first time since the letters had started arriving, I felt truly afraid. This wasn't just a prank anymore. It wasn't just an overzealous admirer or a curious neighbor. This was someone who knew me in ways that I hadn't realized, and they were getting closer. But how? And why? I checked every window and door in the apartment, making sure everything was locked, every blind pulled shut. My heart was racing in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The apartment that had once felt like a new, fresh start now felt like a prison. I hadn't done anything to deserve this. And yet, here I was, paranoid and trapped by an unknown stalker, who seemed to be one step ahead of me at all times. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing little noises outside my window, scratching sounds, the faintest tap of footsteps in the hallway. But when I peered out the window, there was nothing, just the quiet street below, empty as always. I checked the locks again, my mind spinning with possibilities. Maybe it was just someone from the building playing a sick game, or maybe it was someone who had been watching me from a distance for a while. Either way, I wasn't taking any chances. The next day I contacted the building management, but they assured me there was nothing to worry about. They said they hadn't received any complaints or reports of strange behavior from other tenants. The manager even suggested that it might be a harmless prank, but they'd keep an eye out. But as I left their office, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't taking it seriously enough. If someone had been watching me like the letters suggested, they could be anywhere. They could be living right next door. I decided to take matters into my own hands. That evening I stayed up late, watching out of the window, trying to catch a glimpse of anyone who might be watching me. I stared down at the street for hours, but there was nothing. Just empty sidewalks and the occasional passing car. I must have looked crazy sitting there in the dark, waiting for something to happen, but I couldn't stop. I had to know who was behind these letters. Around midnight, I heard a noise in the hallway outside my door. At first I thought it was just the building settling, but then I heard it again, a soft shuffle like someone walking slowly down the hall. My heart leaped in my chest, and I quickly turned off the light, pressing myself against the wall in the dark. I didn't move a muscle. The shuffling continued for what seemed like an eternity before finally fading away. I waited for a long time, too afraid to check the peephole, too scared to open the door. The next morning I found another letter. This one was different from the others. It was simple, almost blunt. I see you. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as I read the words. How was this person getting so close? How were they able to keep evading me? I felt trapped, suffocated by the knowledge that someone was out there, watching, waiting. In a panic, I decided to take action. I called the police, explaining everything: the letters, the strange noises, the feeling of being watched. They took my report seriously but told me there wasn't much they could do without any solid evidence. They suggested I install cameras, start keeping a log of anything unusual, and stay alert. As I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and frustration. I wasn't alone in this, but it didn't feel like enough. Whoever was behind this had a way of getting too close for comfort, and I had no idea how to stop it. Story 26. I lived alone in a small apartment on the top floor of an aging building. The creaks and groans of the old structure were something I had gotten used to over time, a constant background hum that reminded me of the building's history. But lately, things felt different. Strange noises began to echo through the hallway in the middle of the night, soft and distant at first, like whispers carried on the wind. I tried to ignore them, convinced it was just the building settling, the old pipes shifting, or maybe the wind howling outside. Still, every night, the noises persisted, becoming more distinct, as though someone or something was walking just beyond my door. At first, I dismissed it. Everyone knew old buildings made noises. The pipes would rattle, the floorboards would creak, and sometimes the wind would make sounds that seemed too real to be just the wind. I convinced myself that it was all natural, the usual sounds of an apartment that had seen better days. But then, one night, as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, I heard something different. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers gently tapping against wood. It came from the hallway just outside my door. My heart skipped a beat as I strained to listen, but the sound stopped as quickly as it had started. I sat up in bed, feeling a tightness in my chest, unsure of what to do. I got out of bed and walked cautiously to the door, my hand resting on the doorknob as I hesitated. The hallway outside was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the street lamp filtering in through the windows at the end of the hall. There was no one there. No footsteps, no signs of movement, just the quiet hum of the building settling. I opened the door just a crack, peering out into the darkness, but I saw nothing. My pulse slowed as I closed the door and locked it, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. It had to be nothing, I told myself, a trick of the mind in the quiet of the night. But that didn't stop the noises. Every night after that, they grew more frequent, more insistent. Sometimes it was the sound of soft footsteps pacing outside my door. Other times a tapping or faint knocking, as though someone were gently rapping their knuckles on the wood. I told myself it was just the building settling, that it was just the pipes again. But each night, the sounds seemed to come closer, as if whoever or whatever was making them was getting nearer to my door. I started locking the door tighter and double-checking the windows before bed, even though I had no reason to believe that I was in any real danger. Then, one night, it happened again. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong, when I heard the soft, unmistakable sound of knocking at my door. The knocks were slow and deliberate, as if someone were trying to get my attention, but they weren't loud enough to be a forceful demand. I sat up, my heart racing, and listened for a moment. The knocks continued, just 3 taps in a rhythmic pattern. My stomach tightened as I slowly rose from the bed, every part of me screaming to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But curiosity, no, fear forced my feet to move. I walked cautiously to the door, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of it. Who could be knocking at my door at this hour? I hadn't invited anyone over, and there was no reason anyone would be out there. I pressed my ear against the door, listening intently. The knocking had stopped. Everything was silent again. I slowly opened the door, just enough to peek outside, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty. There were no shadows, no signs of movement, just the empty stretch of carpet and the faint, eerie glow of the street lamp. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped out into the hallway, looking down both directions. No one. I glanced around the corner at the end of the hall, where the stairs led down to the ground floor, but it was empty as well. The silence was deafening. I closed the door behind me, locking it once more, trying to calm my racing heart. It had to be a prank, I told myself. Maybe someone was messing with me, though I had no idea who would want to do something like that. Still, the unanswered question gnawed at me. Why would someone knock and then disappear without a trace? Over the next few nights, the knocking returned. Sometimes it was at the same time, other times it came at random hours, always followed by an unsettling silence when I opened the door. It didn't feel like a prank anymore. I started to question if I was being watched, if someone was standing just beyond the door, waiting for me to open it. The air in the hallway grew colder, and I found myself glancing nervously at the door every time the knocking started. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves, that I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. Then, one night, I decided to stay awake and listen. I propped myself up with a pillow and waited for the familiar sound of knocking. Hours passed, and the silence of the apartment was almost unbearable. Just when I thought I might drift off to sleep, I heard its soft, deliberate tapping against my door. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. The knocks continued, the same slow, rhythmic pattern as before. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end as I sat there, listening, watching the door in the dim light. But no other sounds came. No footsteps, no breathing, just the knocks. I couldn't take it anymore. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed the number of the building's superintendent. He was an older man, always gruff and disinterested, but when I explained what was happening, he promised to come over and check it out. His skepticism was obvious, but I was desperate. I couldn't stand the thought of being alone in the apartment anymore, knowing that someone or something was knocking at my door every night. I needed answers, or at least some reassurance that I wasn't losing my mind. When he arrived, he checked the locks, the windows, and the hallway, but found nothing unusual. He dismissed it as a product of my imagination, telling me that old buildings often made odd noises. But as I stood there, listening to the hollow silence of the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Something or someone was out there. And the knocking, no matter how often I heard it, was never a coincidence. That night, as I sat in my bed, the knocking started again. This time it was louder, more urgent. And when I opened the door, I found no one. Just the same emptiness as before. But I knew, deep down, that whatever was making the noises wasn't going away. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could ignore it. Story 27. It had been a long day at work, and all I wanted was to get home and unwind. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm golden hue over the streets as I made my way down the familiar sidewalk. The noise of the city, the hum of traffic, distant conversations, and the occasional honk faded into the background as I let my mind wander. I had gotten used to the routine of walking home, and today was no different, or so I thought. As I passed a small cafe on the corner, something caught my eye. Across the street, at the far end of the block, I noticed a man standing perfectly still on the sidewalk. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just standing there, gazing in my direction. I couldn't see his face clearly from this distance, but there was something about the way he stood that made my skin prickle. It wasn't just that he was standing there, there was a stillness to him, almost like he was waiting for something or someone. I kept walking, trying to ignore the strange feeling creeping up my spine. But as I took another few steps, I couldn't shake the sensation that his gaze was still fixed on me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder. Sure enough, the man was still there, standing motionless, and his eyes seemed to follow me. I quickened my pace, hoping that I was just being paranoid, but the unsettling feeling wouldn't go away. I crossed the next intersection, telling myself it was nothing. People were always standing on street corners, waiting for traffic or perhaps waiting for someone. I tried to put it out of my mind as I turned onto a quieter street. But when I looked up again, my heart skipped a beat. The man had crossed the street as well and was now walking on the opposite sidewalk, still keeping a distance but matching my pace. My stomach dropped. The timing was too perfect, too deliberate. There was no way he could have known which direction I was going to turn. Yet here he was, mirroring my every move. I took a quick right, hoping to lose him, but when I looked back, he had done the same. He was following me. My breath caught in my throat, and I picked up the pace, my footsteps quickening. I glanced at him again, this time making sure he was still on the other side of the street. And sure enough, he was there, not a single step out of sync with mine. He was walking so calmly, so deliberately, as if he knew exactly where I was headed and what I was going to do next. The more I thought about it, the more my heart pounded. How could this be a coincidence? What was he waiting for? I rounded another corner, hoping to lose him in the winding streets of my neighborhood. But when I glanced over my shoulder, he was there. The man was still following, still mimicking my movements as though he were a shadow. I turned another corner, more sharply this time, and picked up my pace. But no matter what I did, No matter how many turns I made, he was right there. Always a few steps behind, always doing exactly what I did. The dread that had been building inside me was now an undeniable force thrumming in my chest. I knew I had to do something, but the thought of confronting him made my stomach churn. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, but it felt like every option led back to the same terrifying thought. He was following me. I was being hunted in plain sight by a man who mirrored my every move. I reached the next intersection, and before I could even think, I darted across the street, hoping to put some distance between us. But as I reached the curb, I glanced up and saw him a few paces away, already crossing the street to follow me. There was no confusion now. He was doing this on purpose. His eyes, though obscured by the shadows of the evening, seemed to gleam with something I couldn't quite place. Was it amusement, malice, or was it something else entirely? I couldn't help it. Panic began to swell in my chest, and my legs carried me faster than I'd ever run before. I turned into an alley, hoping the narrow, dimly lit passageway would offer me a way out. I heard his footsteps behind me, but they never sped up. It was like he was taking his time, letting me feel the fear seep into my bones, savoring it. The alley twisted and turned, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right behind me, his presence as close as my own shadow. Then, suddenly, there was a break in the alley, a small street with a few parked cars, lit by a single lamppost. I turned onto it without hesitation, but when I glanced over my shoulder, I saw something that froze me in place. The man was no longer there. He hadn't made the turn. It was as though he had disappeared entirely. I stood still for a long moment, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My chest was tight, my heart pounding in my ears. Had I imagined it all? I looked around the empty street, my eyes scanning for any sign of him. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no movement, just the faint sound of my own breathing. Still, the unease gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the thought that he was watching from the shadows, waiting for me to let my guard down. Maybe he had never intended to confront me, never intended to say a word. But the feeling of being followed, mirrored, hunted, was it in my head? Or was there something more sinister at play? I kept walking, keeping my eyes on every corner, every shadow. The fear remained curling around my thoughts, even as I reached the safety of my apartment building. I entered the lobby, glanced over my shoulder once more, but I saw no one. Yet deep down I knew this wasn't over. The man who had mirrored my every move hadn't vanished. He was out there, somewhere, and he was waiting for the next time we crossed paths. Story 28. The scratching noises started faintly at first, barely audible. I brushed them off, telling myself it was just mice in the walls or maybe the house settling, an old building creaking in the night. But after a few nights, the scratching grew louder. It came from my closet, a consistent and unnerving sound, like claws scraping against wood. I would lay in bed, wide-eyed in the dark, listening to it, my heart racing. But I convinced myself it was harmless, just the usual creaks and groans of a house that had been standing for decades. I ignored it as best as I could, going about my daily routine. Each day I would open the closet, grab what I needed, and close the door without ever looking too closely inside. The noises continued, relentless in their frequency, but I didn't think much of it. Mice were common in older houses, especially in the fall. Still, there was a strange unease that settled in the pit of my stomach every time I passed the closet. It was like something was watching me, or worse, waiting. One evening, after another restless night spent listening to the scratching, I decided it was time to face whatever was causing it. I had to know what was making the noise, even if it turned out to be nothing more than a few pests. I gathered the courage to walk over to the closet, my pulse quickening as I reached for the door handle. I hesitated for a moment, hearing the familiar scratching, now louder than ever, and then I pulled the door open. The closet was exactly as I had left it. Clothes hung neatly, shoes were arranged on the floor, and everything seemed ordinary. But the scratching continued, a sharp, frantic sound that seemed to reverberate from the back of the closet. I stood there for a moment, listening, my heart in my throat. Was it possible there was something behind the wall? Some animal trapped in the space between the closet and the outside? I took a step forward, my hand reaching out to the back wall, where the scratching seemed the loudest. My fingers brushed the surface, feeling for any cracks or holes where an animal could have slipped through. But as I did, my eyes fell to the floor of the closet. It was a small detail at first, just a thin layer of dust coating the wooden floor. But then, something caught my attention. The dust wasn't undisturbed. There in the middle of the floor was something written. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but no. The message was there, clear as day, scrawled in the dust. The words were simple, but they sent a chill down my spine. I'm still here. I froze, staring at the words, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The room around me seemed to tilt slightly, as if the air itself had grown heavy. My breath caught in my throat, and the scratching noise seemed to grow louder, more frantic, as though something was trying to escape. I swallowed hard, my mind racing for an explanation. Who had written this? And more importantly, how? I hadn't seen anyone in my closet, and I certainly hadn't left a message there myself. I backed away from the closet, my hands shaking. The scratching noise stopped suddenly, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. It was as if whatever had been making the noise was now aware that I knew about it. I stood there, staring at the door, unsure of what to do next. I couldn't leave the message there. I had to investigate further, but a part of me felt frozen, paralyzed by fear. After what felt like an eternity, I finally took a deep breath and stepped back toward the closet. I wiped away the dust from the floor with my hand, but the words remained. The dust was thick, and yet the message had been clear enough to remain visible, even with my efforts to clear it. It was as though the message had been there long before I arrived, written in a way that no amount of cleaning could erase. My mind raced with possibilities. Could it have been a prank? But who would do something like this? And why? The more I thought about it, the more questions seemed to pile up, none of which had answers. I was alone and the house had always been. I didn't have any roommates, and no one else came to visit often enough to leave a message like that. But the message wasn't the only thing that unsettled me. The scratching noise had been real, and whatever had caused it was still there, lurking behind the closet wall. I turned to face the closet again, my eyes scanning every corner, every shelf, every piece of clothing. But everything appeared normal. It was just a closet, just my things, nothing out of the ordinary. Yet the unease that had settled in my chest wouldn't go away. Something had been in there, and it was clear now that it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. Whatever had been scratching at the door, whatever had left that message, was real. My hand reached for the closet door, and for a moment, I considered opening it fully, stepping inside to see if there was anything hidden in the back, anything that might explain the scratching. But I couldn't. I was too terrified of what I might find. The idea of opening that door and discovering something or someone lurking inside was too much. Instead, I took a step back, closing the closet door with a soft click. I left the closet shut, but the sense of dread stayed with me, gnawing at my mind. It wasn't just the message. It was the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. Whoever or whatever had been in that closet wasn't gone. They were still there, waiting. I had no idea who had left the message or what it meant, but one thing was clear. I was no longer the only occupant of my home, and whatever was in there was still watching. That night, I locked every door and window before going to bed, my mind racing with fear. The scratching noise never returned, but the silence that followed was just as oppressive. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound, any sign that something or someone was still waiting. But all I could hear was my own heartbeat, a steady reminder that I had no answers and no way of knowing who or what was still there. Story 29. It was late in the evening when the phone rang, breaking the stillness of the house. I had been reading, curled up with a book on the couch, the kind of quiet night I had been looking forward to all week. I wasn't expecting any calls, and the display showed an unknown number. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. Something about the unknown number made me feel uneasy, but I shrugged it off and answered anyway. "Hello?" I said, my voice cutting through the silence. At first there was nothing but static on the other end. I waited, listening for any signs of life, and just as I was about to hang up, I heard a soft, barely audible whisper of my name. My heart skipped a beat. "Sarah," the voice breathed, the sound so faint it could have been my imagination. I quickly pulled the phone away from my ear, looking at the screen to make sure the call was still active. It was, but no one spoke again. I stared at the phone in confusion. Maybe I had misheard it, or perhaps it was some sort of glitch. My mind raced to explain the voice away, but deep down I knew it was something unsettling. I had heard my name unmistakably clear, but the voice didn't belong to anyone I knew. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I hesitated, considering what to do next. The thought of blocking the number crossed my mind, but I wanted to be sure. I opened the contact details to check for any clues. That's when I saw a blocked number. My fingers trembled as I stared at the screen. The number that had called me was one I had blocked months ago. I didn't recognize it at first, but now, seeing it again, a wave of dread washed over me. I hadn't thought about this person in a long time. Blocking the number had seemed like a simple solution at the time, but now it felt like a decision I regretted. It wasn't long before memories started flooding back. The voice on the phone had been familiar in a way that disturbed me. I tried to push the memories aside, but they lingered, clinging to the edges of my thoughts. A year ago, I had a brief but intense interaction with someone, a person I had met through mutual friends. At first, they seemed harmless, even kind, but as time went on, they became more persistent. Phone calls, messages, uninvited visits. The kind of behavior that had made me uncomfortable enough to block them. I had thought blocking the number would be the end of it, that I could move on with my life. But now, seeing that number again, something felt off. It was as though I had never truly escaped. The thought of that person reaching out to me again sent a jolt of panic through my chest. I couldn't ignore it. I needed to know who was behind the call. I dialed the number, hoping for an answer. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Just as I was about to hang up, it clicked. The same soft whisper that had sent chills down my spine earlier came through the line again. "Sarah." The voice was clearer now, more insistent. It wasn't a glitch, and it wasn't my imagination. Someone was on the other end, someone I didn't want to hear from. I felt a rush of nausea, my stomach twisting with unease. My finger hovered over the end call button, but I couldn't bring myself to hang up. I wanted to know who was on the other side, wanted to confront whatever it was that was haunting me. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite myself. For a moment there was only silence. Then the voice returned, low and breathy. "You know who I am." I slammed my finger down on the button, ending the call. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. Who was this person? Why had they called me after so long? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I stared at the phone, the screen still glowing in the dim light of the living room. I couldn't stop thinking about the voice. It wasn't a mistake, it wasn't a glitch, it was intentional, deliberate, and that terrified me. I went to my contacts, scrolling through the blocked list again. The name next to the number was still there, but it felt like a distant memory. I hadn't seen or heard from this person in months, not since I decided to cut ties for good. And yet here they were again, reaching out in a way that felt like a violation. It wasn't just a phone call, it felt like an invasion of my privacy, an intrusion into my life that I wasn't prepared for. I tried to calm myself, reminding myself that I had taken steps to protect my privacy. I had blocked their number, changed my settings, and even gone so far as to keep my social media locked down. But despite all that, they had found a way to contact me. The realization made my skin crawl. How had they done it? How had they gotten around my barriers? I paced the room, trying to think logically. Maybe it was just a wrong number or some prank. But the more I thought about it, the more I doubted that explanation. I had trusted myself, trusted that blocking the number had solved the problem. But now, it felt like I had done nothing more than set the stage for something far worse. I decided to call the police, just to report the strange behavior. It wasn't the first time I had been harassed by someone, but it had been the first time it had felt so deliberate, so calculated. I needed to let someone else know what was happening, even if I couldn't explain it fully. The police officer who answered my call seemed concerned, taking notes as I explained everything that had happened. But when I mentioned the name of the person behind the calls, their reaction surprised me. There was a brief pause before the officer said, "We've had some reports about them recently. You're not the only one." I felt my heart sink. So I wasn't the only one who had been targeted. Someone else had been dealing with this too. It made me feel less alone in my fear, but it also made everything worse. This wasn't just a random occurrence. It was part of something bigger, something I couldn't fully understand. The officer assured me they would look into it, but as I hung up the phone, a new dread settled in. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the person who had been haunting me for months wasn't going to stop anytime soon. The phone calls had started again, and I knew deep down that they wouldn't be the last. Story 30. I had always been a private person, someone who valued their space and solitude. The moment I moved into my apartment, I made sure to draw the blinds every night before I settled in. It wasn't that I had anything to hide, but the idea of someone watching me, even unintentionally, was unsettling. The world outside seemed distant when the blinds were closed, and I could retreat into the comfort of my own little bubble. I didn't think much about it. It was just a habit, something I did every night without fail. One evening, as I sat on my couch reading a book, I noticed something strange in the reflection of the blinds. It was faint at first, just a shadow that shifted as I moved. I leaned forward, squinting at the glass, trying to make out what it was. My heart skipped a beat as I realized that the shadow wasn't mine. Someone was standing outside directly in front of my window. They were looking in, their figure clear as day in the reflection, but their face was obscured by the darkness outside. I could make out the shape of their body, but nothing else. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I froze, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to run to the window and confront the person, but another part of me was too afraid to move. My mind raced, trying to figure out if I had seen this person before, but nothing came to mind. I looked around my apartment, hoping to find something that would explain what I was seeing. There was no way they could have known I was home. My blinds were always drawn. Still, the figure remained there, unmoving, just staring through the glass. It felt like an eternity passed, though it was probably only a few seconds. Finally, I gathered the courage to turn on the lights. I expected the figure to disappear, thinking they had been watching me from the shadows. But when the lights flickered on, the reflection was gone. There was no one outside, no trace of anyone standing there at all. I rushed to the window, pushing the blinds aside, but the street was empty. The dim glow of the streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. But there was no one around. I felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion. Had I imagined it? Could it have been some kind of trick of the light? I shook my head, trying to make sense of it, but the feeling of being watched lingered. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the mind. But the unease wouldn't go away. That night, I double-checked the locks on all my windows and doors before going to bed. I kept the blinds drawn as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. Every little sound in the apartment, every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. I tried to tell myself that it was nothing, that I was just overreacting. But every time I looked at the blinds, I couldn't help but think of that figure standing outside, staring in. The next few nights passed without incident, and I began to relax, thinking that the whole thing was just a weird moment. But then it happened again. I was sitting on my couch, this time watching TV, when I noticed the same reflection in the blinds. There, in the glass, was the shape of someone standing outside. This time the figure was closer, almost as if they were standing right up against the window. I couldn't see their face, but I could make out the shape of their head and shoulders. My pulse quickened. I turned off the TV and held my breath, waiting, but the figure didn't move. It was like they were waiting for me to notice them, or worse, waiting for something. I turned on the lights again, and once more the reflection vanished. I bolted to the window, this time pulling the blinds up so quickly that they snapped against the wall. But the street outside was empty, just like the first time. My heart pounded in my chest and I felt dizzy. I wanted to scream, to shout out into the empty street, but I remained silent, afraid that if I made a sound, the figure would somehow hear me. I searched the area around my building, looking for any sign of movement, but the only thing I could see was the faint glow of the streetlights and the quiet darkness of the night. The next morning, I called the landlord to ask if anyone had been around the building recently, maybe someone who worked on maintenance or the grounds. I didn't know why, but I needed to hear that someone had been near the apartment, something that could explain the strange figure outside. The landlord was surprised by my question and assured me that no one had been around lately. "Everything's been quiet here," she said. "No one's had any issues or complaints." I thanked her and hung up, but the emptiness of her words made me feel even more uneasy. If no one had been around, who was standing outside my window? And why? Oh, I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was wrong, something I couldn't explain, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't safe in my own home. Over the next few nights, I kept a closer watch on the blinds. I tried to act normal, like I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder. But every time the streetlights flickered outside, my heart would race. I was becoming obsessed with the idea that someone was lurking in the dark, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. One night, I decided to confront whatever or whoever was out there. I waited until I saw the reflection again, standing just beyond the glass. I felt a surge of courage, an adrenaline-fueled need to end this fear once and for all. I turned on the lights and rushed to the window, throwing open the blinds with a determination I hadn't felt before. But when I looked outside, there was nothing. No figure. No movement. Just a quiet, empty street. I felt a rush of relief, but also something else, an empty, gnawing sensation in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't over. It couldn't be. Whoever or whatever had been watching me was still out there, somewhere, just beyond my sight. I wasn't alone in my apartment, no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise. And the silence, the emptiness of the street outside, made it all the more unsettling. I didn't know what to expect next, but I was certain of one thing: I could never let my guard down again.